guy's been there, so he wants to talk to Tracy. Tracy's ignoring him. I've talked to him. You've talked to him. Mark's talked to him. He has a point. But I go. I know. I can't just write a report that says you can only have 5.
Not only that, even if you could write that, he's going to be grandfathered with the numbers. The buildings are separate issue. Does he know what you look like?
Oh yeah. He used to be. I was in economic development. He was the chair of the economic development committee.
Jimmy Kay's already up there doing a media interview.
Well, yeah, that's why he jumps on this stuff. Yeah. He doesn't really have an opinion. He's just like, I have a little wedge here, and I can get some good pub out of this.
Yeah. Is it going? Good. Why are you here? There's no animals.
Strength in numbers.
Actually, she's here because at lunch we're going to do it on camera together for Dogs Off Leash.
Oh, beautiful. Okay.
Are we?
Hey, sure.
Are we?
Wishful thinking, buddy. I could do that.
Of course you can. You know more about it than I do.
I'm just coming out of vacation, you know.
Oh, how was it?
It was great. We saw so much though. Like,
You guys went out east, right? Yeah.
we went through Quebec, northern Quebec, through New Brunswick, down to PEI, back over to Nova Scotia, and then we went down, took the ferry from Nova Scotia back to New Brunswick, and then drove down the coast, Maine, New Hampshire.
Then you had a good vacation.
Is that what retiring is? Is that what retiring? Like, I just seem like this is like I'm not into it. Like, my adrenaline's up too long.
Right.
Hey, girl. How are you? Good. You? I totally thought I was the only one here. I was sitting there like.
Oh no.
Share.
We can share.
That's the dep list and then the annotated agenda.
Thank you. I want to see what. This doesn't have any motions, right?
No,
Handles
no,
it.
nice hair.
Everybody's saying that.
It's vacation.
It's because I knew I was doing it on camera.
Yeah.
Liz. Hey, welcome back.
How are you?
No idea.
Where's Carlton? Where's everybody?
Why is that different than any other day?
I have a thing against short sleeve dress shirts too. I have a thing against short sleeve dress shirts.
Oh.
It's not cool.
It's written all over from his performance on a daily basis to what he wears.
Oh, there really is a on camera or on lunch if you want.
Oh, good.
It's just that Alicia did the. She's the one that said we had the blitz over the summer, which we didn't have. So then we pretended to do it to get some stats. And now we're going to say the results of the blitz we didn't have.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I can be there to add some color.
That's your beauty. Knowledge.
Beauty knowledge, right. So when do you take a vacation?
Well, I didn't technically get vacation this year. The first year you don't have it. But we're going to probably take off in December. Close enough.
Where are you going?
Well, Deb's changed her mind twice. So we were going to Turkey. We were going to Istanbul. And then we were going to the Galapagos. So now it looks like we're going to Bolivia.
Really?
So,
Okay, I would vote for Bolivia. A couple weeks. good reasons. A, I wouldn't go anywhere near Turkey or East Timor. It's just too unsettled.
Oh, yeah. But
I have a
that's the fun.
nephew.
That's the fear factor.
I have a nephew that lives there.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, he's a professor at the university. And every time they have a scare, they literally go to places like, so he's Canadian,
Right.
obviously. So they constantly drives into his place so that they don't able to go and families can go here. So we don't have kids, actually, from that perspective. Of course, if they bomb the university.
No.
But anyways, Bolivia, I've never been there. I've been to South America, but not to Bolivia.
So we're looking at doing a hiking trip, but it's so we're kind of iffing on that, or we'll just go down and kind of go see this. Just go see everything. We'll take a wander around. Go for a week. Yeah, Deb's company kind of shuts down for that Christmas time period, so it's a good time for her to do it. So we usually are for Christmas. Have like an early Christmas. Sorry, see you kids, right here.
Yeah, this year we're actually taking our children away after Christmas.
Nice.
We're going to take them to the Dominican. I'm just waiting for this Maria or Norma to see if it, because I was tracking it. So the kids keep saying, look. I said, no, I don't want to look at this. I don't know which islands are going to hit, right? So, like, Cuba, we weren't going to go there anyways. But the Dominican is right in the vibe I'm looking at. And now with this Maria or Norma or whatever it is. So, I'll figure it out. I keep saying, have you booked it? Have you booked it? I said, no, I haven't booked it. Don't book me. Keep booking me.
Morning. Nice. Will you be ready?
No, they don't. Nobody sits there.
Yeah, so we're taking our kids, Deb's 2 kids and my 2 kids, and there's significant others to probably October 2018 to Mexico. So we've got a timeshare there. We're able to get our timeshare's actually in Miami, but we can change it. So it turns out we can get 21 bedroom condos in the west, right on the beach. So we usually go there every
I just think that Carlton. Okay, I knew you were familiar.
You're very good.
I said to Rob.
He's an engineer, but he's okay. Carlton is over there.
Anyways,
vacation, Dominican maybe.
so this is the first time we've actually done a vacation.
Family, yeah.
They're all good.
Yeah, same here. So we've got,
Try to do one every year.
yeah. So we've got this timeshare. We just bought every even year. We have 1 week in a 2-bedroom condo in Maui. Deb and I have only used a couple times, but we realized that with the kids and everything, it's to transfer it into Mexico because the beach is beautiful. It's an easy flight for everybody. And points-wise, I had tons of points, and she's got tons of points. We just fly everybody down there. So it's just come with complete kitchens, and so buy some groceries and take everybody out for dinner. So it's turned into kind of a. We got married there, so we brought all the kids down. So it's just our kids. So this would be our 3rd kind of family trip there. So it's kind of like every second year tradition.
Yeah, it's important. Don't waste it.
It's hard because I've got everybody's in Toronto. My son's in British Columbia. I haven't seen him in a year. Right? So it's hard. Yeah.
You talk to him about it.
Well, he's at nursing. Right now he's doing kind of post-call policing. So a lot of times there's no cell or certain the keys.
He's
Out in the middle of nowhere. He's based in Prince Rupert, and then he has to take a boat to where he works.
Good morning, everyone. We have quorum, and I'm calling this meeting to order. Welcome to the 21 meeting of the License Standards Committee. As chair of the committee, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to members of the public and those watching live online TV. As usual, I'd like to remind everyone that you can find the agenda for today's meeting and follow the meeting in real time at www.toronto.ca/council. For those of you who are in the committee room, the TV screen in the back of the room in that corner provides real-time updates concerning where we are in the agenda and what's coming up next. The Licensing Standards Committee acknowledges that we're meeting on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit Nation, the Hodawani-Nashani, and the Huron-Wendat, and home to the many diverse indigenous people. Members of the committee, any conflicts of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none, none noted. Can I have a motion to confirm the minutes of June the 14th, 2017? Vice Chair Karijanis, all those in favor, against? The speakers, we have a list of speakers, and we have, so as chair of the committee, I'm going to hold both items because we have deputations. And the first item on the agenda is the tow truck industry review and recommendations. And we have a few speakers here. So we'll start with the first one.
And Mr. Chair, I have a question or a point of order, I suppose.
Yes, please.
If my memory is correct, I think we last voted on tow truck regulations maybe 2010 when I first got on the committee. So is it possible that staff give us an overview on some of the recommendations after the speakers? And I would suggest the same thing on the cannabis legalization.
Thank you, Councillor. That's actually...
Just so that staff know that we would like a staff presentation and they can get ready.
Vice Chair,
Chair, good morning, and good morning to all. I was wondering if, regarding the tow truck operator, some of us were not around and some of us got maybe the wrong attitude about the industry. I was wondering if we can get a staff, I guess, presentation in the beginning and then hear the deputants. Would that be?
No, that's in order. So I'm going to ask staff. So I'm going to ask our city staff if they can give us a briefing on the tow trucks industry. That's great. Thank you. So we'll hear from staff first, and then we'll get to the deputants.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and everyone. Today, we have something we can work with in respect to going through the recommendations on the tow truck industry, which is our first item. Unfortunately, we don't have it electronically, so we may have to default to some old school overhead, but we'll try to help guide you through the recommendations that are being made on this front.
Would it be possible perhaps to share a copy of that with the members of the committee?
Absolutely.
Whatever point. Thanks.
Absolutely. So maybe I'll ask one of my staff to get in touch with one of our staff upstairs who might have access to this.
That can be emailed to our office, and then we can get it as well. Thank you.
We're happy to get that for you. So, all right. So see what we have here. Yeah, I can look at it up there. The eyes are still working, I can see it that far. Okay. So thank you very much for the impromptu opportunity to walk you through some of the recommendations that are being made in respect to the way we regulate the tow truck industry. I do note Deputy Mayor DeBearmaker's reference that it has been quite a substantial amount of time since there have been amendments made to the tow truck bylaw governing tow trucks, so we thank you for your interest. So generally, there have been directions in the past. We have been here at Licensing and Standards Committee previously, twice as I recall, on this matter, and in all cases it was referred back to us. So as you note, the last time we updated the rate in particular for accident tow rates was 2006. So 11 years the tow industry has been operating under the same rates. Since the time we were sent back to do this work, the province undertook a substantial review of the towing industry, and their results of their work included amendments to the Consumer Protection Act, the Highway Traffic Act, and the Repair and Storage Liens Act. Many changes geared towards consumer protection. There were also amendments made to ensure that the operators within the towing industry were recognized from a safety perspective, because they are often in dangerous situations on the side of the road. So having the requirement for people to pull away from the side of the road when they see a tow truck operating was something that changed as well. So, but that does not deal with what we are proposing for you today. We'll give you a highlight of what you do have in front of you. I don't think we need the title page. So first and foremost, we're dealing with the regulated tow rates. So just of note, the city does not regulate all of the towing rates in the industry. There are two circumstances that the city sets the rate that towers can charge. The first being a tow off of private property, notably because the consumer or the owner of the vehicle is not there to engage in the tow or make the arrangement, because their vehicle being removed from private property. So we regulate that rate. The other rate, which is quite important, is in the event of an accident. Notably, someone's involved in an accident, they're in the middle of the road typically, don't have the ability to start calling around and canvassing. So for accident tow rates only, we have a city-established rate. All of these rates relate back to 2006. So 11 years, no CPI, no increase whatsoever. What we are putting forward to you is an update of that rate to 250. The current bylaw differentiates between city street and a highway by the rates. We didn't feel that that was necessary. The level of risk inherent in operating a tow truck and towing a vehicle off the road is the same irrespective of city street or highway. So we're saying one rate for accident tow, which is $250. And that would take the vehicle from the scene of the accident to the collision reporting center. We're also proposing that going forward, that rate is increased by CPI annually. So we don't end up in a situation where we have an industry operating under 11-year-old rates in the future. The additional pieces in respect to rates, we've identified a flat rate for recovery services. So that would be a situation where a winch is required, perhaps the vehicle's gone off the road onto private property into a ditch, or as we unfortunately see in some cases more and more these days, vehicles being turned on their side in the middle of the road. So where a tow truck operator needs to do additional work to right the vehicle in order to tow it, we've set a cap of $100 additionally for that work. Part of that includes the taking of 2 photographs to prove the requirement for the additional $100 worth of recovery service work. The other rate deals with those cases where the vehicle is not being taken directly to a collision reporting center, but rather may be taken to the consumer or the auto owner's place of choice outside of the City of Toronto. So any distance beyond 5 kilometers outside of Toronto, we've set a per kilometer rate of $3.25. So again, those are in situations where an accident has occurred. They are not going to the collision reporting center. That could be because the damage is less than $2,000, or it's through the night and the police have attended and investigated the accident, or in other cases where the police still attend on scene to investigate the accident, then this tow, that rate would apply to those types of tows. Currently, our bylaw has a restriction on retowing. I don't need to get into a lot of the intricacies of that, but simply this is to remove that prohibition. The way the system will work in this proposed regime is from accident tow to collision reporting center. At the collision reporting center, the tower is required to drop their vehicle and leave the collision reporting center. The consumer, the person who owns the vehicle, can then contract with any tow truck operator they so choose, and that may be the one who took them from the accident scene. So we're just eliminating that restriction right now that exists. Okay, so we have a little bit of a picture that kind of depicts where each of these scenarios occurs in relation to the collision reporting center and the rates. Okay. So under the bucket of consumer protection, some of these amendments do marry with the recent amendments from the province with the Consumer Protection Act. One of the things we're recommending is that this accident tow rate be applicable to all vehicles that are under 7,000 pounds. Currently, it's 6,000 pounds or less. And the intention here is to capture light, regular duty passenger vehicles, not commercial vehicles. We understand significantly larger vehicles require additional work. This does not regulate that. This is simply to regulate your standard passenger vehicles. And we needed the amendment with the weights, and we're using the gross manufacturer's vehicle rating weight. It's the only one that we can look to substantiating. The big component change here to align with the Consumer Protection Act provincially is the requirement for a written authorization in advance of towing. So we are prescribing in our recommendations, and you can see that recommendation number 15 deals with the requirement for a consent to tow, a written authorization entered into between the owner of the vehicle and the tow truck operator. So we outline those. Keep going. We've added additional provisions and/or are amending provisions that currently exist. Currently, our bylaw says that the operator cannot charge more than 15% above what they had estimated. Consumer protection legislation provincially now says not more than 10%, so this is being amended to capture that. As well, they require the acceptance, have to have available the acceptance of credit card payments in addition to cash, that tow truck operators are not permitted to stop anywhere between the accident scene and the collision reporting center, or accident scene and the destination as prescribed by the consumer or police officer in those cases where the CRC is not attended to. Another important piece that we heard, and I will say at this point, I should have said at the outset, there was a substantial amount of stakeholder engagement done on this particular file, so we really had a lot of meetings and a lot of good discussions with the industry and others. One of the things we heard from the public was, needing access to personal property that may have been left in their vehicles. So we're simply embedding a requirement that people are permitted, that tow truck operators cannot prohibit someone from going to their vehicle to retain their personal property. So again, some other items that align with the provincial legislation around gross vehicle weight rating and equipment. So we've added a couple of components on equipment, the mobile phone with digital camera or phone with camera to align to the photographs we're saying are required for recovery services, and as well ensuring that all tow truck operators have high visibility fluorescent safety vests, and that aligns with the concerns about tow operators on the side of the road and their safety. And then I say thank you. So that's helpful to have a slide that tells me to do that. So at a very quick and high level, I think if I was to summarize the total of the recommendations and what their intention is here, A is to recognize that the rates that the city does regulate ought to reflect, better reflect the cost of the service being provided, and that our bylaw aligns with the recent amendments under the Consumer Protection Act and others. So that's the overview. And I guess deputations, and if there's any further questions, I'll be happy to respond.
Thank you, Madam Executive Director.
Okay, thank you.
At this point, members of the committee, either we can entertain questions from staff at this point, or we can go to deputations and then we can ask questions. Are we okay with that? Okay, fantastic. So we'll get to deputants first now. And the first deputant that we have is Michelle James, followed by John Parsons and Aris Marinas. Michelle James. You're the first one. Please come forward.
Good morning.
Good morning. Please have a seat, either one, yeah. And there is a little button there we can press. You have 5 minutes to speak. Please go ahead.
Thank you. One concern that when reading the recommendations that I noticed was in the recommendation number 15 for a written authorization. What my concern was number 1 of the written authorization was to give the person on the side of the road a pamphlet that outlined their legal rights and obligations and what the tow truck's obligation was. The Consumer Protection Act actually speaks to the written authorization requirement as well, and in the regulations it has everything that's being proposed except for giving the legal rights. At the side of the road, in the middle of a tragedy, after an accident, somebody's not going to be reading their legal rights, and it's probably not the best place to give it because it might confuse people. I'm asking that you consider that instead of adding to provide the legal rights, leave that portion out. However, request all of the rest. With the way that the Consumer Protection Act is written for the invoice, all of those points are covered. Having an additional piece of paper and additional paperwork may not be the best thing to do. Having the tow truck driver fully fill out the invoice before engaging in the tow, having the consumer sign the invoice, and whether they pay it or the shop pays it, there's triplicate invoices. They can give a copy to the vehicle owner on site so that no changes can be made afterwards. But I think giving extra paperwork for a separate written authorization is duplicity, and the Consumer Protection Act is already speaking to all of these things, and these are things that are required for tow truck drivers in order to operate properly, and it would still provide protection for the public because prior to engaging in the tow, the public has the opportunity to review the bill, which includes the amounts that are going to be charged, and it also says the start and also the destination. The consumer agrees to that, and everything is laid out exactly as the recommendation says, except for giving them their rights and responsibilities at the side of the road, because I don't think that would be a good place to do that kind of thing. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. As we have questions, Councilor Nuciara.
Yes, just, and I missed, Michelle, who are you representing?
I'm a paralegal. I represent several tow truck companies in the towing industry, so I'm actually just here on my own to speak to this. I've been in the automotive industry and the auto body industry for 20 years.
Okay, so do you not feel that by handing a pamphlet to the consumer, it would prevent any future disputes, that they're aware of what, their responsibilities are and the roles?
Current towing...
Is it not a plus for the tow truck drivers as well?
It could be. The current towing invoice actually does outline what the legal amounts to charge are on the city street and all of that. Of course, we're going to amend it, but there's still going to be on the tow bill is with municipal licensing and standards, and it states what the laws are for the towing. So the person seeing that bill is going to see that the law is $250 if that's what we get, and then they will see that their bill shows $250 with the HST and the total, and then they would sign that. All of the information that they require is going to be on the bill. Now, giving them a pamphlet to notify them what their rights are is absolutely wonderful, but at the side of the road where the tow truck driver's got to hook up the vehicle and get out of the way, having somebody try to figure out what their legal rights are right on the side of the road may not be the opportune place to do it. And when you're giving somebody a pamphlet at the side of the road to make a decision, they may start questioning, well, do I want this tow truck? Am I going to call another tow truck? Am I going to impede traffic for longer? It's probably better to give that at the collision reporting center instead of at the side of the road, but they would still have the requirement to have the bill signed in advance so that the consumer is fully aware of what is being paid and where the tow truck driver is bringing the vehicle, and they would have a copy of that with them.
Thank you. The next question is Vice Chair Karichanis.
Thank you, Chair, through you to the deputant. I might sound a little bit naive, but what I understand is that handing me a pamphlet that says I can refuse you, what the rates are, what my rights and responsibilities, where you're going to take my car, where you should be taking my car, is this something that you're not supporting?
It's not that I'm not supporting it. I think it's a great idea. The more educated somebody is, the better a decision they can make. What I'm thinking is at the side of the road, information overload may be confusing people.
Certainly at the side of the road, through the chair to yourself, when an accident occurs, you get 3 or 4 different tow truck operators that come and they hand you a pamphlet of like what you do and what you don't do, fill out, the accident report and all that stuff. Wouldn't you think that also letting me know what my rights and responsibilities, or my obligations to you or you to me, is something that I must know, that you should go through?
I agree. I think there's laws that govern what the tow truck driver is allowed to do at the side of the road. When a tow truck driver comes up on an accident, they're actually not allowed to go and speak to the person. They have to stay, I believe, 60 meters away or something like that until the police attend. Or if there's no injuries and no property damage to the city property, then it gets taken to the collision reporting center. If the obligation is to take it directly to the collision reporting center, the information can be given at that point.
I thank you, but however, let's make this in layman's terms, very simple. I'm on the street, I get in an accident. No police shows up and I must have my vehicle towed away. Are you trying to tell me that the tow truck operator should not approach me? Just a simple yes or no.
Not if police are not attending.
And has this been the practice out there that you know of? That they don't approach?
In the event that there's an accident on the highway, the OPP come and there's nothing. On the street that I'm aware of, I'm not out in the tow trucks, but that I'm aware of, the tow truck driver will ask if everybody's okay. And then it has to be determined if the vehicle is going to the collision reporting center or not. That's usually done by a phone call by one of the parties involved in the accident, calling the police and being directed to the collision reporting center.
So are you saying that they're to approach me or not to approach me? I'm on Lawrence and Victoria Park, I'm in an accident. Police are not called, it's simple. Are they to approach me, yes or no? Simple, please, if I may, and I thank you.
I don't know the answer to that because the law does say they're not supposed to approach, but of course, in that situation, if there's nobody there, they have to approach.
Would you be surprised if I tell you that 99.9% of the time that they approach?
No.
Therefore, you're telling me that, according to what you stated before, they're breaking the rules.
Well, I think the rule is impossible not to break because of the situation that there is a collision reporting center and the police don't attend every
You'd want to see
accident.
that rule changed.
That would be a good way, it would be a good first step, yes.
So you're coming up to me, the tow truck driver through the chair comes up to me and says, are you okay? Are you in an accident and all that stuff? Would you want to tow? Don't you think at that point in time, besides asking me those questions, they should say, should you decide to go with me, these are your rights and obligations, and this is what you must know before they hook me up?
I do agree with that. I do think that it's a good thing. I think that giving a pamphlet with a whole bunch of information still may be information overload. Maybe there's a way to incorporate it on the actual tow bill itself instead of having to do a separate authorization.
Would you not, through the chair, and I really appreciate it, don't you agree with me that if you put this in the tow bill agreement at the back of the page in small print, I will not bother reading?
I don't agree that I wouldn't bother reading, but most people probably wouldn't.
I'm on the side of the road. You present me a tow truck agreement in small print, and then I start reading. Isn't that a little contradictory to what you're saying to us? I mean, I'm confused. You really have me confused here. You want me to read the small print before I sign, and yet you don't want the overload of telling me what it is. But isn't it overload when I read the small print?
No, my interpretation was that you're proposing to hand somebody a pamphlet with their rights and obligations and the tow truck driver's rights and obligations in a very detailed
But isn't
way.
that the same as at the back of the bill?
Question.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah. Is Deputy Mayor Liberamica, please go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair, did you submit this to our clerk?
I was told
your
that I didn't need
deputation.
to submit in writing. I did speak to somebody orally, but if you would like, I can submit it in writing.
I think for you and the other deputants, all the deputants that'll speak today, it always does help us, because an hour after you leave here, will I remember exactly what you said and all the nuances? Probably not. So if you could give it in writing to our clerk, we'll circulate it to all of us. That would be very helpful.
I will undertake to do that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. James. Any other questions? Thanks so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
John Parsons.
Chair, with privilege, could we bring Eris Marinos to speak before me? Thank you.
Okay, so we have Mr. Marinos and Mr. Parsons. So you have 5 minutes each. Please go ahead. Thank you.
I did submit, want to make sure everybody get one of these. You got
The
them?
clerk will get it and
Yeah.
circulate that. Thank you.
Okay, as the current director of the independent towers, I would like to bring our concerns forward on the new proposed bylaws. We do appreciate that there's finally an effort being made, because it's been at least 10 years since we've had any kind of increase in this rates and other stuff going on with the industry. As you are aware, my personal opinion is that I don't think you guys should be able to regulate us because we're CVR and provincially controlled. But that's my personal opinion. We can speak to that at some other time. The proposed accident rate of 250 right now is currently still too low. The neighboring municipalities have been at least that and even higher for about the last 10 years, plus mileage charge, waiting time on top of the regular flat rate that they have. The idea of having a police officer sign a tow bill, I don't think will work. We tried that years ago. None of them wanted to sign for it. And I can give you firsthand on that because I tow all day, right? Not unless it's a police impound, they will sign off on it. But we couldn't get anybody to do anything like that at the time, right? The current and the proposed of us filing storage rates and all our rates, I don't seem to think that that does anything for us, because when it comes to dealing with insurance companies or anybody like that, they just simply won't pay what we file. And the municipalities, all the neighboring municipalities as well as especially Toronto, don't back us up. What's the sense of us filing storage rates or any kind of rates? I'm technically 3 or 4 blocks from City Hall. That's where my facility is. Now, my storage rate is basically the insurance company wants me to pay the same as the amount they're paying a guy in Peterborough. So how does that make sense? So our rates really, unless you guys can find a way to back us up with our rates, what we file, means nothing. The idea of leaving the area, once we leave the area, the boundaries of Toronto, of giving 5 kilometers free, I find that hard. The 325 for once we leave the area is a little low. Most companies are right now are about the $4 mark. But 5 kilometers free, why is it every time something comes up with the towing industry, it always has to be free? You guys up here don't work for free. Neither does anybody else in this room, so why should we have to? Right? Finally, that there should be some definition of the gross vehicle weight on the vehicle, what we're allowed, the ceiling should be on a vehicle before we go into a different rate. This has been a dogging issue since the day that we had the cap of 166 or 130. It should be the curb. It should not be the curb weight. It should be the gross vehicle weight. All you simply do is open the door on the vehicle, it lists you what it is, and that's it, right? Now, stepping up the gross weight from 6,000 to 7,000 is another problem. I don't see how that is going to make an effect. It's only going to force the companies or whoever it is, the drivers, to get bigger trucks. You know how hard that is going to move around in the city? We're already congested. The bigger trucks are having a hell of a time moving down around the city. Now, the off-road recovery and the rollovers should be defined. That guy's not going to spend 3-4 hours pulling a car out of a water or of a ditch for $100. He's going to blow that much in fuel. And now, even if you take 2 pictures, that's not going to do nothing. So if, at $100, you might not get anybody to do it. It should be defined, and there should be a time or something associated with the actual performance that you are doing. Private property is still kind of low. I think it should be somewhere around the $150 mark, right? The toll bills, separate toll bills, bill of rights, and all that. The toll bills, I think most companies, at least we do, ours are in triplicate. So I'm not sure what they mean on that part, right? But as bill of rights or basically for the towing industry, for the driver, I thought that's what the city bylaw on us is the bill of rights. I mean, if we do something wrong, they enforce it on us. So I think it's the same thing, right? There's also on the toll bill should be a writ of seizure, where if we don't get paid, we should be able to repo the car or do something. You've taken that out of the Consumers Protection Act, right? From us. The CRCs are a big cash cow that the City of Toronto is giving away. Should be able to recoup this money. And I know I'm just a little bit over in time. The right to choose a company and a repair facility has already been defined by the provincial government. The gross vehicle weight of the vehicle has already been defined by the government too, so I don't think the city has the right to do that.
Mr. Marinos, just a question is,
Time.
you are making a presentation, both of you together, so you have
Yes.
5 minutes, and
Yeah.
Mr. Parsons has another 5 minutes, so it's as long as the total is 10 minutes for both of you. Please go ahead.
Do you want to wrap up, or you want?
Yeah, I got one more thing. As the storage facilities, right? In the provincial laws, it's a 9 to 5 under Consumers Protection Act. That's been changed. Any after hour, a fee can be applied, right? So I think again, the 9 to 5, which is part of you guys are just duplicating what the provincial government says. And now the CRCs, again, there is no laws governing them right now. So anything can happen. Complaints that we put in there just go to deaf ears. Nothing happens there, right? The soliciting that they do inside there, the slandering of the tow truck drivers, that has to be looked over quickly in order to make this fair and everybody. You should be able to regulate them. You should be able to license the staff inside there, just like they do the tow trucks and all the drivers. They do something wrong, they should be fined or fired or whatever. Right now, there's no regulations to do anything with these people. And I'll let John take over a couple of them.
Mr. Chairman, I'm volunteer advisor to these fellows for about 6 years now, since they never have any money to pay a regular lobbyist or to hire a GR person. So they get me, and maybe my advice has been quite helpful, I think, to them. Some of you are concerned about the reputation of the tow truck industry. As an industry, it's not at all what it used to be. There are bad actors in every industry. There were a lot in this one, but only 14 of the 400 municipalities in Ontario were even regulated. And so the bad actors actually tended to move out of places like Toronto and go into unregulated areas, but nevertheless, we had our own share. So after the Bill 15 was passed, I happened to be in Rome at the time. I was pretty annoyed with certain ministers. It was a pretty lousy bill. Let them know it. You found 1,000 tow trucks around Queen's Park, quite distressed. That was about 2 years ago. Since then, we've had a fabulous relationship with the province, both the civil servants and at the political level. We're even meeting with them again tomorrow at 10 on some further regs to clean up the industry and make it consumer protection. And there's a couple of things in yours, but I want to appreciate your staff. This is the beginning of what I hope is a positive relationship that the industry can have with City Hall. Some of you know that I used to hang around here, well, not hang around here, but many years ago. But it's really sad that 11 years have gone by and the relationships have been that bad. But the context today, particularly to all of you, the vice chair and everyone included. This is not the same industry it was a few years ago. Hopefully we can get the bad actors out of there and we can begin a really good positive relationship with City Hall, both at the staff. We appreciate the consultation we've had with them to this point, and we appreciate you looking at the Collision Reporting Center, which I'm glad that outside of the City of Toronto, the taxpayer benefits. Here you've got the same owner for two centers. The service is terrible. One MPP wrote me about how his experience, which was absolutely atrocious, and it's in the notes that you got from us. And they're publicly owned. Instead of having the same owner with two collision reporting centers that are not serving this consumer or the tow truck guy who has to hang around there the whole time, or the police officers. And we're really glad that you're going to have a close look at that. Thank you.
Thank you. There's some questions for you, and Deputy Mayor Libermaker, you're the first one. Please go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, and thank you both for coming in today. I've got a couple of questions, but maybe I'll start off with, I think at the beginning of your deputation, you mentioned the proposed tow rate, and the other 905 municipalities, if you will, have higher rates, or I think you even said, well, they've had that for 8 or 10 years. Can you tell us what those rates are, say in Mississauga, Pickering, Markham?
Mississauga is 290, I believe.
Sorry, 290?
290.
Yep.
Plus?
Plus, yeah. Durham is 350.
350 in Durham. Over in Peel and Oakville or Mississauga?
Oakville is, I think Oakville's might be part of Mississauga.
Yeah.
The other way.
Peel, yeah. Right, and in the York region?
York region, they're on their own. They vote. There's no bylaw. I believe they vote on their own as an association.
Okay.
Barrie or Dante is 350 plus.
Okay.
Right.
So why do you think our professional staff, who have probably talked to either you or your industry and many people, why do you think the recommendation before us is not to go to 290 or 350?
I can tell you that because they actually told me that. They took what the current rate was at the time, 166, and they added the price of index of 1.3, 1.3, 1.3, and compounded all the way till they got to 230 at the time, I think it was. And then we started complaining even that was too low.
Okay. So your understanding...
Well, they already told me that. That's my understanding is.
Yes. So I'll just say your understanding is that the rate that's before us today is being recommended because it was what you had before.
And they just added whatever it was, 1.3, 1.3, 1.3 inflation, whatever it is, right?
And what do you think the rate should be?
I think we should be up there, at least with surrounding areas, at least 350.
Okay. The other, again, thank you for submitting your comments. It helps us to read them. You take issue with the staff recommendations saying the first 5 kilometers north of Steeles, for example, is free, and you're saying what? That it should click in the first kilometer? As soon as we leave
the border, whatever it is, the jurisdiction is.
Why?
Why should we work for free?
They're going to have to calculate 5 kilometers here. Okay, now I can start charging. I mean, we don't know where it came from.
So if
I mean, where did it come from?
I cross Steeles and my garage is at, say, Highway 7, I don't know how many kilometers that would be.
And whatever it is, take the calculation, 4 kilometers. Yeah.
Our drivers are going up there and they're getting their base rate from the city, but they're not getting that little top up.
That's right. So
you're adding a lot of calculation nonsense. I mean, and it could be disputed, you know, 10 kilometers or 5.
Okay.
We don't know where it came from.
Okay.
Is there somebody who's got a garage just north of the city or something, or what the heck's going on?
That was never discussed.
We don't know where it came.
Yeah.
Okay, and again, through you, Mr. Chair, you mentioned in terms of some of the tows, a car flipped into a ditch or in a lake or a pond.
Yeah.
You're saying that some people just won't
well,
take
who are
that.
you going to get to do that for $100?
Right.
You might be there all day.
Right, what do they do now?
Well, it's by meter, by wait time. It's defined, right? We charge by waiting time or whatever. It might take us 3 hours to do. We charge according to the time, right?
You're saying you won't be able to do that in the future?
Well, how are we going to? Let me ask you something. You think you're going to pull a car out with your truck idling or whatever in from the lake? in an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. Sometimes you need 2 people, 2 trucks, 3 trucks to do the job. One truck won't do it.
So through you, Mr. Chair, if I can ask you, I occasionally, watching the TV, see some car that's on a Friday or Saturday night gone down into the lake off a pier in downtown Toronto. I do see them being picked up by a tow truck. So what do you think the charge is now? That was my car that I unfortunately
Depending on the rate that's supposed to be filed, and depending on the vehicle too. It's only, the current rate is only, the gross weight is 6,000 pounds.
Okay.
So depending on the vehicle coming out of there.
Ballpark.
Like I said, I don't know. Could be if he's there for 3 hours, depending on what the towing companies filed rates have.
But you believe that the new regulations make it harder for you, say, to charge me, who's put my car into the lake?
I won't be able to charge you more than $100. So how long is it? If I can't, it might take me 3-4 hours to get it out. I'll leave it there. I'm not going to do it for $100.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Vice Chair Karigiannis.
Thank you, Chair. Sometimes, through the chair to the deputants, thank you very much for coming. Sometimes people have CAA and allows them certain kilometers, so they wouldn't need you if they have, CAA.
Yeah.
Would I be incorrect?
They wouldn't need us for anything. I don't know. No idea what their coverage is for CAA. I couldn't tell you. I don't do CAA, so I'm not sure. I'm not aware of what their coverage is.
I had the pleasure of using CAA, and as a matter of fact, had a couple of 100 kilometers brought in from out of the city into the city. So, I mean, they're there. Now, my other question to you is the following. The former deputant said that she didn't think it was appropriate on the side of the road when there's an accident to present us with a pamphlet that says rights, responsibilities, rules, and all that stuff. Do you agree with her?
Well, let me explain that to you. First of all, there is a pamphlet that's put out already. You get those at the reporting center, police stations. It says, in case of an accident, what you should do, when you should go to the reporting center, when not go to the reporting center, when to call the cops. There is one out there that is handed out at every police station.
Through the deputant, to the deputant, through the chair. My question was slightly different. My question to you, sir, was, should you not give me a pamphlet that it says what our mutual engagement should be, rules and responsibilities from you to us and from me to you?
Listen, that's exactly what that pamphlet says. But then again, I'm not a lawyer either. They hand out legal advice either, right? So you hand out a pamphlet like that, and when you're in a scene of an accident, and you explain to your clients, prospective clients, if they want to hire you, what they must know, what they must not know? Yeah, and I also provide them, I always tell them exactly the reporting center, what the cost is, where it's going to go.
So NAAP, this is an umbrella organization for the tow truck drivers?
The independents, yes, sir.
Sorry?
Independent drivers, yeah.
Independent drivers. And are you guys self-regulated?
Yes, we are.
So if somebody doesn't, what is the penalty that your organization
does? What, sir?
What is the penalty that you do?
No, does what that you're referring to? What it is?
If somebody does not give a flyer, does not explain to the person on the scene of an accident rules and regulations.
Hey, I'll explain that to you too. Also, if a driver overcharges or any part of regulations, we'll go.
My question, sir, through the chair, was what would you do to that independent tow truck operator if she or he does not explain what the rules and regulations
are? Most likely, he'd be removed from us because we're self-regulated. We're self-regulated, sir.
And would you be recommending his license be removed from MLS?
Oh, I think that's a little harsh, sir, to remove a guy's license for something like that. There must be, it can't be just done on one infraction. There must be 3 or 4 infractions or something to remove somebody's license.
And to your knowledge, sir, all the operators that are in your organization follow that procedure and tell the individuals?
I would assume they have. We haven't had any complaint on that topic, sir.
Is your organization somebody that tells people, like me, when the pamphlet has been handed out, is your organization information on there and people are able to call in and complain or engage?
Call in and complain, sir, is written on our toll bills as provided by the City of Toronto.
But is your organization's name on there?
We can't put that on it.
Okay. So how many complaints have you received on the independent tow truck operators that you represent in the last year?
Couldn't tell you. I'm not the one following that part, sir.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5?
I just finished telling you that, sir. I'm not the one collecting the data on that part, so I couldn't tell you.
Who does?
I believe Danny Sanderson. I think he might be around here. Said he was.
So there's somebody within the organization that does?
Yeah, there is.
And you are representing them, you're the president, you don't know that number?
I don't know the number, sir. I'm not following that number, sir.
Okay, well, I thank you. I find it a little bit hard to
I'm
believe.
just a director. I'm not the president of that anyways. He's right.
Thank you. Councillor Burnside, you're next.
Thank you. Through you. So first of all, I do agree that the one-size-fits-all for rollovers and whatnot is problematic. You did ask a question why there's this expectation of free, and I think that goes back to your own history in terms of when accidents occurred and tow truck drivers would come on scene and say there's no charge if we take you to this garage. So I think that's a historical issue. I just wanted to point that out because you did ask that question. In terms of your concern about the no fee for going outside of the city, I think in response to Councillor de Bearmaker's question, you raised the point that it would be very difficult to do calculations, but isn't that what you're asking to do, is calculations on distance?
Well, I'm not. John said it was very difficult. I came to the point.
I guess we just don't know where it came from, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
We
So
just-
calculate.
It's not a big deal, but
I'm not saying
it's
it's
just another
difficult.
piece of paper
I'm just saying
calculation.
that why is it there that we should work for free?
So
Once
okay.
we leave that
my
border,
question.
doesn't the truck still run, the fuel still burn as we're leaving?
I'm not arguing that. I'm asking, but my question is, I just want to clarify that really your concern isn't about measuring distance. That's my
No,
question.
that was John that said.
me.
Okay,
So,
Yeah,
okay, I just wanted to make
in
sure.
this game.
I'm
My
trying to
concern-
understand.
No,
That's
that
all I'm
wasn't-
trying to do. Okay.
My concern is why.
Thank
we
you.
should work for
My next question is then, would it be, seeing as there's a reason I asked that question, and the reason is it's the lead into this question, which is if you had a flat fee, would you then, of let's say $250, would you then be open to distance charges on top of that? Because where we're coming from, right? Like you could be a block away from Howden if that's where they still go, and that's one fee, or you could be in downtown Toronto and that's the same fee.
Well, that's what we have now.
Right. So you would be open to, that's my question, a flat fee and a distance.
Well, that's what we would be open to, a flat fee or whatever it is, the regulator rate's gonna be $250, $300 plus kilometer charge to wherever you're going, right?
Yes, the answer is yes.
Okay, yeah, it's hard to get.
Yes.
I love one-word answers. Thank you. I'm a simple guy. Now, in terms of what have you ever done any? And this is probably more anecdotal than anything. But one of my concerns, I think it was with that Howden location, is sometimes the wait times can be very long. I don't know if they still are.
Both locations is the same, sir.
Right. So, have you done any sort of analysis? And once again, I'm sure it's anecdotal, but do you have, like, in terms of the wait times in Toronto versus Durham? I know obviously the distances in Toronto are probably lower than Durham. You have to a lot farther to travel to their collision reporting center. But in terms of wait times, because you do have to wait with the customer, right?
Well, can I answer that? Councillor Burnside, Eris is running his business. We're all volunteers. You're asking us, in terms of, I am too, research and stuff that frankly, and that's why I still help them 6 years later, because they ain't got any money to hire to do the kind of research that you would like. We look forward to your staff looking into that and comparing where, in fact, up north, the municipality still owns the collision centers and makes the money, the millions that are going through there. I mean, just look at Eris's calculation. You can just imagine the tens of millions going through these accident reporting centers.
Yeah, and I'm not through the speaker. I'm not asking for research. I was just asking. Actually, I was kind of teeing one up for you. I was saying anecdotally.
I will answer the question.
Speaking to your coworkers.
Well, I will
waiting
answer the
times.
question.
That's all I asked.
The waiting, if there is a storm, we're even directed not to go and come back the next day because they can't keep up with the flow. You could be standing outside all the way down the street on Howden with cars lined up, and they say we can't take no more. One is because the compound that we're forced to drop the vehicles in, part of this mandatory drop, can't physically accept all the cars.
Right.
Right? So as we are directed to the reporting center, we have to wait in this big lineup for the police officers to inspect the vehicle. Once the vehicle is inspected, you gotta wait for another lineup to drop the car in the back. Right?
So
And then
this
you gotta wait
problem is
another
more
lineup
than
to get
just,
paid.
and that's kind of what I'm trying to get to, is that this problem is more than just about $250 or $300. There's a systemic problem.
Well, there is a systemic problem. Once you're there, sir, you're directed there, you're still waiting another 2 hours, and it's still the same fee before you can even get.
And what do you, from your experience or others' experience, what's the waiting time in Mississauga? That's kind of the closest.
You know what, Mississauga is a little different because their reporting centers are owned by the city.
Okay.
So they don't have mandatory drop. They drive in, but he looks at the car and goes. But I'm sure there is some waiting time there too. I know there is, but it's not as bad as ours.
So they drop and go. Okay, thank you.
Also, the police officers do attend on scene there, where they don't hear.
Thank you, Councillor Burnside. And Councillor DeGiorgio, you're next.
Yes, excuse me, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, with respect to cars that need to be recovered or brought upright before they can be put on a tow truck, by and large, what's the average time that you spend bringing cars upright? I mean, you talked about an extenuating circumstance, like rolled over into a lake and whatnot, where it takes you most of the day to bring the car back out so you can tow it. But by and large, what happens in most cases?
I'd say depending on where it is, right?
But on average?
Hour and a half, maybe.
How much?
On the street, hour and a half.
Takes you an hour and a half before you can put a car on a tow truck and tow it?
Yeah, maybe more.
No, one that's flipped or one?
One is
Well,
rolled
say
over.
that one's flipped and you bring it upright. Does it take you more than 15, 20 minutes to bring it
Yes,
upright?
it does, sir.
Okay. Excuse me, sorry. My second question is, what's the average number of tows that a tow truck driver does in a day?
That depends, sir.
How many hours do they work?
I mean, most of them are 12-hour shifts, sir.
12-hour shifts, and how many tows might they do in a 12-hour shift?
Depending on the weather, too. You can't go far enough, sir. The weather, you move slower,
How
right?
many do they do on average?
Probably 5 to 6.
5 to
5 to
6?
6, maybe 7.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Speaker Luciana, you're next.
Yes, just a couple of questions. So there were a number of consultation meetings that were held in the fall of 2013. And so did you participate in those consultation meetings?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
All of them?
Pretty well did all of them in the last 10, 12 years or whatever.
Okay, so you do realize that during those public consultation meetings in 2013, that the province, in fact, asked the city to participate in their review?
Yes.
I do realize, yeah. I think Lorraine was there, yeah.
City rep was there.
Yeah, and Mississauga reps
The
were
city
there.
was asked by the province to participate in that review, correct?
Yes.
I don't know, but
Well,
I assume they did, they were there.
Okay, well, my question in your deputation that you made, which I'm a little curious, is at the top of the page, you stress that the city has no business trying to regulate us, for we carry a provincially regulated number.
We have a license, ma'am, from them.
Yeah, so that you're going to address this in the near future, but the province is asking the city and asked the city to participate in this whole review. But you don't agree that the city should be regulating at all?
I agree.
Well,
that's what you put in, your
agreed.
can I
definition
answer?
here.
Can I answer?
I'm telling you.
Prior to this year and January 1 of this year, I repeat, there were only 14 or 17 municipalities out of 400 in Ontario that regulated like you did. So it was a real wild, you go to Ottawa, it's a Wild West show. You think you got a problem here, councillors, in Toronto. You don't want to be in Ottawa. You don't want to be a member of the tow truck industry there either. I mean, it is really a Wild West show. So the province, through these guys this time, asked me to participate in, so I was at every meeting as a volunteer, and we got through 3 ministries, government and consumer services, and those regs came into force a year ago, July. And as of January 1, the CVOR, so the inspections, and in fact, we have another meeting tomorrow morning. And so we've worked really well with the province that every tow truck in the province now has to meet all these standards that we're talking about. Credit card, da-da-da-da. This is now provincial law. So therefore, where the city's role is and where the province's is still a bit up in the air. The industry really would like to get the bad actors, continue to get the bad actors out of the business, and would like a provincial license. For example, a tow truck driver in Mississauga can pick up in Brampton and Caledon. Caledon and Brampton can't pick up in Mississauga, and that's all within the region appeal. So what they really would like is a provincial license. Is there a role for the city? Well, the province is certainly not interested in regulating rates. They've indicated that. But they've taken over a lot of the function that was previously done by only 14 municipalities in the province and made them province-wide, and that's why we're happy about cleaning up the industry. Does that help?
No, it helped, but the reason I asked you that question is in your deputation, I'm reading the top of the page that you're pretty well telling the city, just mind your own business while you're regulating us. And what my point is that the province has asked us to regulate and to be part of the review, but you're telling us to mind our own business. That was my question. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. There's no more questions. Thank you. The next deputant is Lawrence Gond, followed by Candice Cullen from the Toronto Police Services and Raymond Chan. Good morning, Mr. Gond.
Morning.
Good to have you here.
Members of the
Please,
committee.
okay, 5 minutes.
Let me preface my remarks by indicating that I'm not going to be speaking to the issue of quantum. I'm speaking to the issue of the methodology, the process to establish rates. And I'm going to follow a format that I learned in junior high school. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you, I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to tell you what I told you. At least you'll be aware of what I'm going to be speaking of. The current harmonized recommended rate is, in my opinion, not based upon a transparent rationale or criteria. And I'm going to be using now wording that was set by the City Council when this was first reviewed, going back in 2011. It's not based upon a defensible business or accounting model. And the wording which I'm specifically highlighting is it required to be based upon a transparent rationale or criteria. It's also a shift from the rate determination protocols that were previously recommended and reiterated by staff in their previous staff reports, in which they had been dealing with and recommended what was referred to a number of times as a indexing model. The methodology utilized is also inconsistent with, and I'm using the word divorced from, because that's the wording that was put in the memo that was just issued, divorced from the fair value quantification protocols, the regulatory provisions that were recently set by Provincial Regulation 42715, which is a regulation passed under the Repair and Storage Liens Act. And I'm mentioning this due to the fact that there was a lot of commentary here today in regards to being consistent with the province and making sure that we're doing aligns with the province. Well, the province has spent, as you know, 2-3 years under the minority government and under the majority Liberal government dealing with the issue of how do we determine what the value is. Really the question they're asking is how do we determine what fair value is within the meaning of the Repair and Storage Liens Act. By way of explanation, the legislatively created fair value quantification protocol is a fair value determination model that fully satisfies the consumer protection regulatory framework under Bill 15, as the established rates would be a valid determination of fair value of towing and storage services under the RSLA. The proposed rate structure also ignores the currently developing issues related to towing industry workplace safety concerns. It also ignores the safety of the motoring public and the near future costs associated with tow operator training, mandated personal safety equipment, mandated onboard safety equipment, et cetera, and then I'll address that in more detail. These workplace safety related costs and related accident management concerns they're not new to this committee, as they were referenced back in 2012 when issues were raised about the costs associated with doing what has to be done in a safe manner. A harmonized rate structure also, in my respectful submission, ignores the distinct characteristics of a highway tow as opposed to the street tow, and I heard someone say today that they're identical, and just as a layman, I would say that I see a distinct difference between picking up a vehicle on a 40-kilometer highway or roadway as opposed to 140 kilometers an hour on a highway. And it doesn't deal with the issue of what I refer to as blockage on a roadway where, according to everything that I've heard from Ministry of Transportation and the police, the appropriate protocol is that if you can't do it safely, wait for police, and sometimes that wait can be an extended period of time. Now, in terms of my actual, that's what I'm going to refer to, I'm going to actually provide you a little bit more detailed background in terms of what went on for the benefit of those members of the committee who were not here in 2011. As indicated, the last increase was in 2006. This was a 10.5% increase utilizing what I refer to as an indexing model. At that point in time, the rates went from 150 to 166 on the street, and the highway went to $188. The next interim review began in 2011.
Please wrap up.
Pardon me?
Please wrap up.
Now, I had provided you with a detailed report. You all have it. This is like giving you the Coles Notes version. If I can give it to you in very succinct language, the art of creating a rate is not simply a case of picking a number out of a hat and negotiation like some type of labor dispute. There's a methodology set up by
Thank you, Mr. Gon.
province.
Thank you. Any questions to the deputant? Yeah, the deputy mayor, the bear maker, has a question for you. Please go ahead.
Hi, through you, Mr. Chair, and
Yes, sir.
thank you for coming in today. Who did you write this report on behalf of?
Myself.
Okay.
To give you a little bit of a history,
You're so knowledgeable. It's either a great hobby or you know the industry.
I know that I was involved and sat in on every single one of I was a member of the consultation committee of the province. I traveled around Ontario for all the regional meetings, and I had also been involved. I was the founder and co-chair of something called the Fair Value Committee, which was a multi-industry group that was brought together in order to specifically address the issue of fair value. And I describe myself, at least, as the architect of the language which is now in Regulation 42715, which basically says, in order to figure out what the fair value is within the meaning of the construction of the Repair and Storage Lien Act, you take all of your costs, fixed costs, variable costs, et cetera, you add a reasonable profit, and wowie-zowie, you come out with that which is fair value, not an issue of simply saying, here's the number, we'll offer you 230, you don't like it, we'll go to 250 and let's talk about it.
Okay, great. So, and again, you're not telling us what the number is, you're just saying here's a process that you should or should have implement.
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Vice Chair Karijanis.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, sir, for coming to make the deputation. You're very knowledgeable, and it's indeed interesting that you're taking this interest in the industry at absolutely no cost and through your free will. it's to be commendable. My question is to you, sir. We've heard through the industry, and maybe it's in your report, and I'll certainly go through it, but if you can sort of guide me. We heard through the industry that once there is an accident, that they shouldn't give the parties that are involved in the accident a do's and don'ts and what the responsibility is. I'm just wondering if you can comment on that.
I'll just comment based upon my knowledge at what had been discussed previously at the provincial level in terms of the regulatory reviews. The bottom line is that there were two primary goals of the provincial, I call it legislative reform movement in terms of Bill 15. They address consumer protection from a wallet point of view, and they address consumer protection from the point of view of safety. And from a consumer protection point of view, the primary discussion was one of which there was to be created something along the lines of a Bill of Rights. But I think rightfully so, what the deputants indicated, the challenge is that in a accident situation, and I've had my own share, it's a little bit naive to believe that an individual that's in an accident is going to have the time to read and decipher all of the commentary contained in a document. I believe that the overriding methodology to deal with this is you create laws, you create regulations, and either you comply with them or you don't. And if you don't, there's a fallout from that. And someone here mentioned you have a licensing issue to deal with.
Sorry, I'm on the street, I'm in an accident. I haven't been in an accident before. All of a sudden, I get a tow truck operator that comes and starts telling me whatever they wish. Don't you think that I should be given an education by that individual that says, look, I'm telling you this, and here is the fine print? I mean, you require me to sign on to something. I mean, they require me to sign on to something when they hook up my car. Am I correct? And somebody was saying that that information could be in small print at the back. Don't you agree that the operator has a responsibility before he hooks up my car or she hooks up my car, that they go through what I'm entitled to, what I'm not entitled to, and explain it to me?
Well, you're asking me for my opinion on something that's outside of the scope of what I am dealing with today. If you want my citizen opinion, the bottom line is that we have to be realistic in terms of what your expectations can be of a driver who has been in an accident. I mean, I was in an accident last April, and I wasn't in any state of mind to really start reading fine print or anything else. The reality is...
If you are not able to read the fine print, agree or disagree with me, don't you think it's the responsibility of the tow truck operator to educate you and say, look, I'm going to hook you up, this is what you're going to pay, I have to go here and I have to go there, and here is something that in point front that what you need to do. I mean, you're very knowledgeable, so you wrote a report. And I mean, telling me that you don't have an opinion on that, I find that a little hard to believe.
I do have an opinion, but I'm just giving you my opinion, but I'm not an expert on that area. But I can tell you, if you want my opinion is that the consumer has an obligation to inform themselves. When I had an accident, although I was frazzled, I had the ability to formulate what my options are, and my options were to drive my car as opposed to have it towed. But that's only because I'm an educated consumer. Most consumers are not educated, and most consumers are not in a state of mind, I believe, at the point of time of an accident to really start getting into the rationale of, you know, this is what you're paying, this is how you're paying.
Sir, I'm glad that you're an educated consumer. You're probably the exception because you get in an accident, you're really frazzled. And, you know, it depends with your state of mind and all that stuff. Again, agree or disagree with me. Don't you think it's a responsibility of the tow truck operator to go through the rules and regulations before he or she hooks my car up if I'm involved in an accident? Yes or no? That's all I'm looking for.
Councillor Carichanis, the deputy has already...
Time allowing, if you are on the corner of Spadina and Queen and nobody's rushing you, yes. If you are sitting on a highway and people are doing 140 kilometers an hour, the answer is no, you are creating a hazard. And if you ask the OPP the same question, they'll say, get out of here now.
Thank you.
And I have asked the question.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, thank you, Mr. Gold. Thank you for your presentation. The next deputant is Candice Collin from the Police Service, followed by Raymond Chan and Joy Igania. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Candice Cullen, Toronto Police Service. I'm the Pounds clerk and a former parking enforcement officer, so I have a great deal of knowledge in towing. The proposed changes to the bylaw, I agree with. They do need an increase, but we have this opportunity to tighten up a few loopholes that leave a gray area. Number one is gross vehicle weight rating. Technically, when a vehicle is towed, it is at a curb weight or an empty weight, depending on the manufacturer. This is very hard to determine as there is nothing in writing with regards to these weights. A gross vehicle weight rating, in most cases, places the average minivan in a medium rate. So you're hitting the consumer or the family with a higher rate compared to an Austin Mini, when in fact it is the same truck and the same amount of work that goes into it. So my suggestion is, and this is based on information from our commercial vehicle unit, they are trained with the Ministry of Transportation, that we go with a registered gross vehicle rating as per the Ministry of Transportation. So on every ownership for a vehicle, a car, there's no weights indicated. When you start getting into a commercial vehicle, your plate portion now identifies a gross vehicle weight. An average pickup truck is registered at 3,000 kilograms, personal use only. That can be towed by a standard truck. Anything over 3,001 kilograms now becomes a commercial vehicle. As the weights go up, so do their fees for licensing, and then you get into the weight area of CVORs required. This would leave the passenger vehicles to have one rate, especially with the contracts and with the collisions. Anything over the weight you prepared, these people can be gouged. In some cases, not in all. And we have to remember the rates on file with the city are not approved. So unfortunately, you don't know all the scenarios that are out there with regards to what happens or the calls of people crying because of tow bills. So by using this, we all have a way, without popping open everybody's car door to check on a rating, it's there. It's with the ministry. I also have, with regards to private property, towing a vehicle from private property is no different than towing a vehicle from rush hour. But you're charging $108 for that, or from a collision scene, which is $250. In most cases, a minor collision that's going to the CRC is not a technical tow. So I vote, or I recommend, that private property tows, because they are towed by our contracts, MLEOs are licensed by the City of Toronto and overseen by the Toronto Police. Those pounds have to be approved. PEOs attend private property. MLEOs attend private property. They issue city-sanctioned tickets. They go to Toronto Police contract towns. There is a huge cost in getting rid of most of these derelict vehicles and trying to track down the owner. By using our contract rates, which we already govern these properties, we approve them for towing, we make sure the signage is there. That would alleviate this issue under the bylaw, as well as the fact that Toronto Community Housing does not have the budget, and every time they clear a property, They are charged up to $88 per vehicle. Most of these vehicles are never claimed and end up being scrapped. Another issue my pounds tell me is trailers. Scrapyards do not take wood. This is another huge cost, and most of these trailers are abandoned on private property. So I wish you would consider the private property cost and possibly going under our contract, since we are already towing off of these properties rather than having two separate rates.
Thank you. Councillor Burnside.
Super duper. Thank you. Through you. You touched on the private property. So are all tows off private property done through contract tows?
You, all but one company, and that's Bill & Sons, but they have to be approved by Toronto Police, Parking Enforcement Unit, Contract Services Section. Those properties have to be monitored by us. We check their pounds and we audit them.
And sorry, how many contract tows do we have? Tow companies?
We have five.
So it's different than the old days where people, it's a question, where they were just towing off, right? It's totally different now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So we have five. The collision reporting centers, you'd have a lot of knowledge about that, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, just want to make sure. What's the waiting time on average?
When I was there just recently, I was in and out in 45 minutes.
Okay. What are the hours of the collision reporting
6
center?
a.m. till midnight.
What happens after midnight?
A police officer is to attend and investigate the collision.
Okay,
If
that
the
seems counter.
vehicles are not drivable, if the vehicle is drivable, you can attend.
Yeah, I know, you have 24, 48 hours, whatever.
But a lot of times, people are being convinced by some of the more undesirable companies that their vehicles aren't drivable.
Okay, and then that's a separate issue. I respect what you're saying, but that is a separate issue. So if the purpose of let me just understand, the purpose of these reporting centers is to not use valuable police resources at an accident, correct? Right, yes. Unless there's a personal injury, which I understand.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the whole.
Property damage, sir.
Pardon me?
Or property damage.
Property damage, yeah. So that's the purpose, yet we close at midnight. Does that not seem counter to what we're trying to do here?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
But unfortunately, like the city with budget cuts, it affects us everywhere.
Well, okay, so that leads me to my next point. Outside of Toronto, I think the deputant alluded or referred to
Durham?
Was it Durham? They have their own?
They have collision reporting centers.
They control their own reporting centers, correct? Is that correct?
Not
like
that I know.
It's
Not that I know of.
The municipality controls it, no?
Not that I know of, sir.
Do you know any municipalities that control their own collision reporting centers?
Not off the top of my head, sir.
Okay. Top, middle, bottom, anyways, we're good.
No. Unfortunately, the committee I deal with is more police towing.
Okay, fair enough. In the past, because I think you said you were a parking enforcement officer?
Yes, sir, for 14 years.
And in the past, the city did operate their own reporting centers, no?
That would have been prior to, I think it was the 90s.
Yeah.
All that.
Yeah, when they first were introduced, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So if I said to you, I have a concern with the way the system's operating, and twofold. One, in terms of expecting, well, a police officer to attend, which seems to be counter to our goals, and two, that potentially, and I think we've heard it, and I think it also depends on the circumstances, whether and whatnot, of the wait times at these reporting centers.
Well, then again, sir, it depends on the weather. As you and I both know, a little bit of rain, too much snow, black ice, it causes an influx.
Well, when most accidents occur.
Anywhere, even if there's a wait time, unfortunately. It'd be nice if there wasn't.
But so, okay, last question. I'm not trying to badge you because I'm just trying to
I'm not an expert on these.
Okay. But it would seem that, so basically what I'm inferring from our dialogue and everything I've heard is that the city's done a really good job of preparing a system for like the least busy time.
Not really. The busiest times are open.
Oh, okay.
Okay, it's midnight to 6 is the least busiest time.
Well, I was talking in terms of volume of accidents, but.
If you look at the numbers, it would be between 6 a.m. and midnight. After midnight, most times,
okay,
the collisions are other things.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Any other questions? If not, thank you for your presentation. The next deputant is Raymond Chan from the CAA. Good morning. Good to have you here. Please go ahead.
Thank you.
Have 5 minutes.
Morning, Mr. Chair and members of the Licensing and Standards Committee. My name is Raymond Chan, and I'm with the Government Relations team at CAA South Central Ontario. I'd like to thank you for allowing me the opportunity to address committee and speak about some of the bylaw changes that staff are proposing for the towing industry. As you know, CAA South Central Ontario is a not-for-profit automobile club providing roadside assistance to over 2 million members across our territory, with the vast majority of which residing within the Greater Toronto Area. CAA is pleased with many of the recommendations proposed by MLS that update the existing bylaws and align with provincial legislation. CAA actually played an instrumental role in recent years advocating for enhanced consumer protection across the province when requiring towing services. This includes consumers having access to their towed vehicles during business hours to retrieve personal items, the ability to pay by credit card, increased transparency around costs, and further defining what consumer rights are when towing services are needed. When a motorist selects a towing service after being involved in a collision or an unplanned vehicle breakdown, they're largely unaware of their rights. While motorists are now required, through changes to the Consumer Protection Act, to sign a consent form before proceeding, they may not know if the form presented to them adequately captures their rights according to municipal and provincial regulations. A permission to tow form should be employed if a motorist is being solicited for service by a tow operator before any service begins. CAA believes that it is important for MLS to either monitor and approve the forms drafted by towing companies or establish a standard permission form so that details on the form are relevant, accurate, and consistent across all towing providers. Permission to tow through auto clubs actually occurs twice. Once at the initiation of membership and payment of annual fees, and secondly, when the consumer contacts the auto club for service under the agreement or provided under the membership services. Our industry, as you know, is a little bit different. People contact us to have a tow truck dispatched to the scene rather than being solicited at the side of the road. The Government of Ontario recognized this and granted auto clubs an exemption from permission to tow forms provincially. And as the city is now considering incorporating permission to tow forms in its proposed changes, we ask the committee be consistent with provincial legislation and continue to exempt all auto clubs. Further, MLS should retain copies of completed consent forms and ensure that they are logged in order to easily access the information should there be a need to in the future. This recommendation requires permission to tow forms to have 3 copies, one for the towing provider, one for the consumer, and one to be submitted to MLS within a defined time frame. As you may be aware, CAA was also instrumental in having tow trucks included in slow-down, move-over provisions within the Ontario Highway Traffic Act. This provides towing operators with the necessary space to safely provide service at the side of the road. The proposed change for operators to take photographic evidence could put tow operators at greater risk of injury. While CAA recognizes the importance of photos, we believe that every safety measure should be taken to comply with this requirement, as tow truck operators are often providing service with limited room near live lanes of traffic. The concept as written could place tow operators in serious danger. There are also potential privacy impacts to consider with the proposal in its current form. If pictures are to be retained on the personal devices of tow operators and not required to be stored securely, centrally, and/or monitored by the City of Toronto, the risk of photos being lost or misused increases. Moreover, should a tow operator move to a different provider or retire from the industry altogether, there's a risk that the operators could retain this personal information with no accountability to ensure that it is safely stored and/or destroyed at an appropriate point in time. With respect to the proposals around payment options, the report notes that credit card numbers can be phoned into a central facility where they can be processed, whereas debit cards cannot. Under Bill 15, the Fighting Fraud and Reducing Automobile Insurance Rates Act of 2014, consumers are provided options to pay for towing services. Tow operators are required to accept all forms of payment, including credit cards. The spirit of these changes were to provide consumers with a proof of payment, something that does not occur when it only involves cash transactions. I must caution committee that there are also privacy concerns with respect to phoning in credit card information versus having a processing terminal available in each and every tow truck. Phoning in credit card numbers instead of processing the transaction on scene can increase the potential risk of misuse or fraud and contradicts the intended consumer protection efforts by the provincial government. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to address committee this morning, and I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you. The first question comes from Councillor Burnside. So we have the Deputy Mayor Libermaker. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I just wanted to clarify. You're saying that each tow truck should have a debit credit terminal.
I think, I believe that that would be the easiest thing to do. Provided that they have a terminal, it provides an instant receipt and proof of transaction on site so that there's a record and an actual paper trail.
And I just want to make sure I understand, because I know in the taxi industry, there are some taxis that a few years ago didn't have debit or credit machines. We actually had to regulate it because some operators preferred all cash. So you're saying that you believe it's viable and reasonable for every cab to be able to process that charge through a debit card?
Through the chair, I mean, under provincial legislation, it is now required that they that the consumer be offered multiple payment options. So whether you pay by cash, credit card, debit card, and/or check, whatever it may be, it's a particular requirement that's in provincial legislation, and to have terminals available and on site would be in the best interest of the consumer.
Okay, and through you, Mr. Chair, in your opinion, I think our staff recommendation is just for credit cards. I don't think they recommended debit. Do you think it's better to have debit and credit?
Absolutely. Through you, Mr. Chair, I think that providing multiple payment options, like I said, that are available to the consumers, it benefits them because it provides them with choice on how they wish to pay for services.
Okay, so if we can do it at hot dog stands, and my barber has one on his cell phone, you don't think it's a burden to require companies and tow truck operators to have that service available?
I think it would be prudent to have that service available so that consumers have choice.
Okay, and through you, Mr. Chair, I couldn't quite understand, and I do have your written deputation, so thank you. You're saying that you as a CAA are recommending that all the tow truck operators and companies be required to give receipts, but not you?
So our level of service is a little bit different. As I explained in my deputation, I'll try and clarify here, is that when people contact an auto club, they have already entered into a particular agreement by signing their membership form and providing their annual membership dues, that when you do call in for service, that a truck is dispatched to the scene, rather than if you are involved in an accident or your car is broken down at the side of the road, that another tow operator would approach you and thereby soliciting services at the side of the road. So it's a little bit different in our particular scenario with auto clubs.
Okay, and again, through you, Mr. Chair, you are also recommending that perhaps the city require, I'll call it a standard, where is it in here? A standard permission to tow form.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. We think that having a standard permission to tow form would be a benefit for the industry. If you have everybody creating their own forms and you don't have the necessary information on there that may be pertinent and that's important to the consumer, that provides all the information, CVOR licenses, name of the tow truck operator, the company, a telephone number, MLS contact information should a discrepancy arise. I think that there should be a standard in place and that perhaps MLS staff should come up with a particular form so that the industry has something standardized and to use, and that consumers know exactly what to expect should they need a tow.
And could you tell me approximately how many tows CAA does in the City of Toronto per year?
I can tell you across our territory, we do about 1 million calls a year.
What does territory mean?
So our territory is quite vast, so we run all the way from Windsor all the way up to Sault Ste. Marie and as far east as Brockville, Ontario.
Okay, so, and if Toronto was a third of that?
It's probably more than a third. I'd venture in to say that it'd probably be about 2/3 of the amount of calls that we receive.
So 500,000 tows per year south of Steeles Avenue, roughly?
I would guesstimate around that.
Okay, and you'd be very comfortable if the city created a form and you had to follow it?
Well, what we're saying here is that the province has recognized the difference in the nature of our business with auto clubs being dispatched rather than being solicited at the side of the road. They recognize that and actually exempted us from these permission to tow forms, and that's something that I'm requesting here at committee as well today.
And I'm assuming it wouldn't just be your CAA, there are some other ones through...
Correct. So we're asking for the exemption through committee for all auto clubs that operate within the City of Toronto.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And the Vice Chair Karijanis.
Thank you very much, and really appreciate the insight that you're coming to speak to us today. Let me ask this question so I clarify. If I'm a CAA member and I'm involved in an accident and I call you and you come over to pick me up, does your rates or the rates of the tow truck drivers apply, or because I'm a member I get a free tow?
So as a member of our services, you're allotted a certain number of calls per year. So that may be a towing service, it may be a battery boost, or it may be a flat tire change. So you're allotted a number of calls per year, and yes, you pay your annual dues, and you're allotted that number of calls no matter what type of service you require.
CAA plus, I haven't had anything. You're the first call that I made in an accident. You'll come pick me up, take me to the towing center, don't charge me anything?
Correct, sir.
And you will also, from the towing center, take me to the dealership of my choice, again at no cost?
That would be a second call because they require to drop you at the CRC. Yeah.
Okay. Your tow truck operators, do they give your clients, people that are members, a list of do's and don'ts? Are they obliged to do that?
I'm not sure I quite understand your question,
Well,
Councillor.
we heard from deputants before that there is a bill of rights, if you want to call it as such, for the customer, that they didn't want to give it to us. I mean, they didn't want to provide it, or they had difficulty in providing at the scene of an accident. Of course, you don't charge, but do tow truck operators that work for you have that information in their tow truck?
Absolutely. I mean, that there's information that our company provides with respect to towing services. I mean, if you go onto our website, we have a list of what you know, basically what your rights are, what you should and couldn't do when you're involved in an accident.
I'm involved in an accident. You're the tow truck operator, shows up. I've called CAA. Of course, they don't charge me, but is there a flyer that they have that says what my rights and obligations are that you give to me?
Some trucks may do, but again, the nature of our business is a little bit different because you're calling the contact center itself to request for service. That when you do sign that membership form and pay your annual dues, you'll know exactly what level of service you're receiving.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Any other questions? If not, I do have a question. In your presentation, Mr. Chan, you indicated that when photographs are taken of that, and also in your presentation, in your submission, you're making a comment on that in terms of a possible misuse of those photographs, and also whoever is taking those pictures may be in danger. If that was, can you expand on that?
So where that originated was that our concern was that if operators of a tow truck simply had a digital camera or took photos on their own cell phone, that there was no accountability, no follow-up with that. So our question was, what happens after those photos are taken? Is it stored on the server of the particular tow company? Is it submitted to MLS so that should any other further discrepancies arise in the future, that they can go back and look at the photos and determine exactly what the case may be? So from our standpoint, it really comes down to privacy, about what happens to those photos, who has access to the photos, and you know, what the future is for those photos. Should an operator move on to a different company or retire from the industry altogether, if it's on their personal cell phone, what mechanism is in place to comply, to make sure that they're in compliance with privacy laws, to make sure that they don't retain that information that is indeed stored safely and securely in a central location?
Thank you. Question? Yeah, we have, the Deputy Mayor, the Mayor have.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, just to follow up on Councillor Palazzo's question, what is the risk or harm of, say, a tow truck operator comes and takes pictures of my car and there's parts all over so that they can justify the fee, leaves it, say, on her cell phone. 5 years later, she's not with the company, she's doing whatever, she's going through her phone and goes, oh, there's that guy's car with all the car parts on Kennedy Road. What's the danger to me as a driver or to the public? Like, is there something for us to be worried about or no?
I think there's a level of concern that's there that that if let's say there isn't photographic evidence and you choose to file a complaint with MLS, or you may end up in a debate with the tow operator because you disagree on exactly what happened, that you know, personally, I believe that photographic evidence is valid and should be there. My argument here is that it's a safety concern because you're potentially putting operators in live lanes of traffic to take photos, but also the whole privacy aspect, that really what happens to those photographs.
In terms of privacy, I'm just still trying to understand the submission. You know, you have pictures of my vehicle with parts scattered about so that they can justify the charge. And I, maybe as a driver, should be concerned, and the city should be concerned about that photo being in somebody's camera because...
So if I was a consumer and I had required towing services and the tow operator pulled out his cell phone and took pictures of it, I'd be concerned from the perspective that I don't know this individual because I contacted them or they solicited me at the side of the road. I know nothing about them, but I'm in a vulnerable situation here. I don't really have a choice. I need to get my vehicle out of here and out of harm's way and to safety. So by having that picture there and me not knowing this individual or the company that they represent, I have a lot of questions that are there, and if there's no regulation or if MLS isn't involved with the retention of the photos in any way, I think there's a bit of a question there as a consumer as to what potentially could happen with the information taken from that particular photograph.
Okay, recognizing though that we are in a public place and some guy walking along the sidewalk, actually, which happens every day if you watch TV, as soon as there's an accident, everyone's got their cell phones out and tapes and films everything. And I don't control the 15 people who watch the accident and tape it. So again, I'm still struggling to understand the risk or the concern with somebody having a picture of my tire and my fender hanging off my car on Kennedy Road. If it was a picture of me in an accident, absolutely. Personal photos of people, yes. But if you're just taking pictures of a radiator.
So further to my comments, if the pictures were to include more sensitive information such as somebody's license plate, one could potentially take that information, pay a small fee, and figure out, you know, some personal information about where that person resides, the type of vehicle, how long they've had it, ownership information, that sort of thing. So I think furthermore, that's sort of where the privacy aspect comes into play as well, the types of photographs that are taken and specifically what's in those particular photographs.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
And the last deputant that we have is Joy Gania.
Good morning, Mr. Chair,
Joy Gania.
councillors.
Good morning. Good to have you.
First of all, I didn't submit a written submission. I've been on vacation, and unfortunately, I wish I had, because this is a topic that's very close to my heart. I operate a towing company in this city for the last 35 years, and all of these issues are directly related to me running my business. In relation to the rate regulation and the new proposed rates, I'm in favor of the $250 rate. I'm not in favor of the recovery rate as is. I do believe that that could be tweaked a little bit. I believe that there should be a mileage rate for outside of a certain radius, because many a times, especially in the evenings when the reporting centers are closed, tow truck drivers are asked to tow the cars from one end of the city to the other. So the rate doesn't necessarily cover off that. I think the recovery rate could easily be an hourly rate. I believe at the reporting center that there should be after half an hour, there should be an hourly waiting time rate. They have that in Vaughan already, and their process is much faster than it is in the City of Toronto. So they've already taken into account, the process of getting these people in and out, and if they do have high volume days, they took into account that the tow operator has the opportunity to make more revenue if he's not there, and so he should be allowed to charge for his time. As for the private property rate, I think the private property rate is, we've gotten that wrong. I think we need the private property rate should be the same as the police contracted tow rate. I think what a lot of people don't understand about private property towing is the majority of private property towing is scrap vehicles, and those vehicles have maybe they're missing tires, they've got flat tires, they're in underground parking lots. It's some of the hardest work that we actually do. Majority of the vehicles end up being scrapped, so there's not a lot of revenue retained there. The vehicles that aren't scrapped, if the vehicle was towed through the police department, we have to pay a fee to the police department for that, which comes off of our currently $88. We also have to pay a fee for every single vehicle that we bring in off of private property to notify the owner, a registered letter, which costs us somewhere between $10 and $20. We then also have to pay additional fee of another $10 to $15 to do a lien search on every single one of these vehicles. And then we obviously have to go through the process of keeping the vehicle for 60 days under the Repair Restores Lien Act before we can dispose of it. So we've got the cost of storing that vehicle on premium land, because that's all you can call property in the City of Toronto was premium land. We all know what the cost of it. And we're not allowed to tow those vehicles to a little more inexpensive facility. So the $88 currently, or the $108, is really a much lower number. It's closer to $53. Majority of that money gets paid out to the tow truck driver for his services, and it's really a loss leader for us. And it's become an issue for property owners, and I believe for the police department service-wise, is that it's hard to get the drivers to do those jobs, because it's some of the hardest work we do. You go into an underground parking lot to tow a car from private property. It has no wheels on it. You don't have keys for it. It's up against a pole. It's very dirty, dirty work. So I'd like to see that maybe be in line with what the current police rates are. Those rates have already been tendered out and negotiated with interested parties, and they are still cheaper, considerably cheaper than the accident rate. I agree with the authorization to tow form. It's pretty standard. The province is requiring that anyways, so it's a no-brainer. And the form to notify the victims of an accident scene, of their rights should be a no-brainer. We do it already. There's a form that's given out by the reporting centers that we can give out, that our drivers do already give out, and it doesn't seem to be a big conflict. If anything, as prior deputants said, a lot of times people aren't in the condition to actually acknowledge or absorb the information, but the ones that do, and the ones that don't, they wouldn't anyways. But at least they have the opportunity to make that decision for themselves.
Thank you, Mr. Gagnon.
Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you for your presentation. Okay, we have gone through the list of deputants now. It's questions to staff. Any questions to staff? Speaker Nunciara, you're first.
Thank you. So Tracy, can you explain a bit about the private property tolls? So if a private property owner has a car on their property that's unplated, because I think that came up during the past deputations that were made at this committee a few years ago, if I remember that are unplated, or even the unplated cars on the road as well, to get them towed. The property owner contacts a tow company and they get the car towed, and the cost is to the private owner, correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, partially. So someone cannot just have a vehicle towed off their property. They have to engage the Toronto Police Service Parking Enforcement Unit, or if they've got a contract with an agency that's licensed as MLEO, Municipal Law Enforcement Officers, they have the authority through the Toronto Police Service after training and certification to do those tows. And I believe the representative from Toronto Police also mentioned that the police service vets and approves the towers that are permitted to do that work.
So I wasn't here when that deputation was made, but there was a discussion as well, if I remember correctly a few years ago, is that how there's constant complaints about people leaving their cars on the street that are unplated, and we could not get them towed, or there was a problem with that issue. Is that being addressed at all in this report?
So through you, Mr. Chair, anything to deal with unplated vehicles on the roadway would not be subject to this. That's a Toronto Police issue they can deal with under the parking bylaws and their contract tows. Where we have had discussions around people unlawfully parking on private property in the past has been agencies who are issuing the quote-unquote fake tickets and then towing, which we addressed actually in a report we brought last year governing the private property towing, I can never remember these. Anyway, deal with private property agents or agencies that can tow off private property. So it might have been that around that issue, which we locked down. This report today, at least as far as respect to private property, is really just primarily around the rate that they're permitted to charge. And just in respect to the comments the last deputant made, the rate that we had proposed is lower than the Toronto Police contracted rates, which vary depending on district and contract.
Now, if I remember correctly as well, at the last time that we heard deputations, there was also, we had deputations made on behalf of some of the insurance companies, right? About their rates would increase if the rates of towing fees increase. Like, were they part of the public consultation meetings? And as this, if you can just touch a bit on that, because I know there was a big concern.
Absolutely.
And that would be passed on to the consumer, correct?
Absolutely. So through you, Mr. Chair, there was comprehensive consultation done with all stakeholders within the towing industry, within the insurance industry, and the public as well. And, you know, I think if I was to summarize the input from the consultations, is a recognition that the rates as they are not reasonable. They don't they're not close to representing the cost of service for the towers to provide. The insurance industry feedback that we heard was around the $250, $300 mark. They felt was a reasonable range for them to pay for the tows based on their experience. So, I think we've tried to take, of course, for the people providing the service, they want to see a higher rate. For the people that are paying the bills primarily, they want to see a lower rate. But I believe in this case, it was generally, hi, how are you? That's okay. That it was generally in the range. So the insurance feedback that we've had, at least, is the range that the rate that we provided is within what they thought would be a reasonable rate.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Bernstein.
Thank you. I apologize if I am being repetitive here. But one of the concerns was this recovery fee, which is kind of a concern of mine. Does that one system fits all? What's the, I'll say, the rationale for that?
So through you, Mr. Chair, we did contemplate a number of different ways this could have been approached based on type of service provided, time taken to provide the service. We also looked at other jurisdictions that do also have a cap dollar amount for their recovery services. There's various situations. So, certainly we're happy to hear further input or comment on that. We felt that setting a rate that we thought would be reasonably inclusive of the typical type of recovery services that we would see in the City of Toronto, that would be reasonably reflective. And as well something that people could understand. A bit of the concern is if it was solely based on time, then you may have people saying, well, they're moving slower, so they run up the amounts, et cetera. So, it was really just a decision point of what's the simplest, straightforward, but hopefully as reasonable to the industry as we could be in this case.
Fair enough, but would it be reasonable to have even a few different rates? One is a standard recovery. One would be, if it is in water, I think that adds a level of complexity. And certainly if the car is flipped over, that's also another level of complexity. Would you be open to that, or do you think that's...
Through you, Mr. Chair. So it's a great question, and it is part of what we discussed, and you've done a great job at articulating how it can be difficult to piece off, this type of a recovery is X and this type of a recovery is Y, and ending up with an exhaustive list of different types of circumstances or rates that would apply under those circumstances. So certainly we're open to taking back any direction to review. The point of what we're trying to get to here is to make sure that there's a reasonable amount of compensation to the service providers, and we're happy to continue on any piece you'd like us to.
Okay, thank you. And then pretty much my last question. We heard from a deputant, or at least I understood or I inferred, that when vehicles are taken up to the collision reporting center, there could be a waiting time involved. But then when I spoke offline to you, I kind of, my impression is something a little bit different. Could you clarify that process when a vehicle is towed to a reporting center?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I was interested to hear that as well and made note of it. Our bylaw does require that the tow operator take the vehicle directly to the CRC, and upon arriving at the CRC that the vehicle is dropped. Now, obviously on-road experience maybe is indicating there are times where it's backed up to get in, I'm supposing. That's not information that we had in hand prior. But we do understand there's delays at times, and that's where we looked at the $250 rate as being an all-inclusive rate, inclusive of some of these time challenges, including our traffic, speed of traffic. So we did try to contemplate the impacts to the trip from the accident scene to the CRC, inclusive of wait times. Certainly one of our recommendations is to go back and review the operations of the collision reporting center. If that is a piece of that assessment and we need to come back with something at a later point, we'd be happy to do that as well.
Okay, and you may, sorry now that I shouldn't have said it was my last question. It leads me to another question is, did you look at average time from when they pick it up or hook it up or whatever the terminology is to the time that they drop, what the average time is in Toronto?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is not something I don't think we had readily available. Do you have any data? No. Given the time of day, the area in the city, the type of traffic, including construction, that's not something that we were able to quantify. So primarily just looking at generally the geographic dispersion of the two or distribution of the two CRCs relative to the city. There will be times where they're at the bottom end of South Etobicoke and need to go up to the CRC.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to interrupt you because I only have 20 seconds.
Sorry.
So would it be reasonable to say it's under or 2 hours or less, if you were to guess?
I would assume, yes. It must
Okay,
be under.
and then my last question, I got 11 seconds, and I try to be respectful of that time. My last question is, would you be open to a fee if there is additional waiting time at the reporting center? Because it seems to be, to me, to be very unclear if they are actually dropping in like a 5-minute period or it's taking them another hour and a half.
You know, through you, Mr. Chair, I think that's a very fair ask for us to look at that impact to their ability to drop and complete the trip. That's information that we do not have right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Carichanes.
Thank you, Chair. I was listening to my colleague said that he was running out of time. Maybe you could consider allowing us to have a second round. However, I will ask a couple of questions, and maybe I'd like to have a second round. Second tow from a collision center, this is on page 3 of 9. City Council delete the current restriction on retows and permit tow truck owners and drivers to charge a fee for towing a vehicle from a collision center to a destination as directed by a consumer, provided the fee is agreed upon in advance by the consumer. So what you're saying there is that after to the collision center, if I want to keep on continue to be towed, that there's a fee that's been agreed upon.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that we will not be regulating the tow rates for a tow that originates from the CRC to the vehicle owner's chosen destination.
Okay. On page 4, information explaining the roles, rights, and responsibilities of the tow truck owner, operator, and consumer. Is this something that you're advocating that the tow truck owner, driver give to the consumer in writing?
Through you, Mr. Chair, you are referencing the recommendation 15, Council?
Yes, I am. With the first one.
Thank you. Yes, we are, and that is in line with what the province is expecting to be provided as far as a consumer's bill of rights.
Since it's not clearly, would you entertain something that says that something like, information explaining the roles, rights, and responsibilities of the tow truck owner, operator, and the consumer in writing, to be put in?
So through you, Mr. Chair, our intention was these were elements that would be included in the written authorization document, the consent to tow, that would be imprinted permanently on it. It not need be a second pamphlet or another piece of documentation.
Through the chair, don't you agree that in the agreement of document that this is going to be small print, fine print at the back of the page, and a lot of people don't bother reading it? You're in an accident. All of a sudden, you're given this and you just sign off. Don't you think that it's important that this is explained by the tow truck operator before he or she hooks up the car?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm never going to argue that consumers ought to be provided with as much information as is possible for them to make a decision.
So, through the chair to you, would you be willing to entertain something that says that they're given this in writing before they sign a contract and explain to the responsibility to be by the tow truck owner, driver, and the consumer is being verbally, verbally and as well as something in writing that they can read?
So through you, Mr. Chair, the intention of recommendation 15 is that this information is provided in writing on the written authorization for the tow, and that the consumer receives a copy of that before as the tow services are going to be provided. I think that's enforceable. I don't know that I would step out to say that we should be compelling tow truck operators to say certain things, though I think as a good practice, an industry best practice, they ought to. But our intention of this rec is exactly as you've indicated, that in writing they ought to receive very simply the roles, rights, and responsibilities of each person involved in the transaction. And that does align with the recommendation out of the province.
Let me try it one more time in a different tactic. Would you not agree with me that it's best that a pamphlet is given that outlines what the duties and responsibilities are, and when you sign that contract, there's a little tick mark there, you say, yep, read it. Because if this is at the back of the contract, I bet you dollars to donuts, plus $100 that you'll never get to read it. You'll never look at it. You'll never look at the fine print. Would I be wrong in that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, you would not be wrong. There are many people who don't read the small print. I will just note that there is some regulation pending in respect to this exact issue from the province, where they're talking about the Consumer's Bill of Rights, and they're going to pass regulation on how that is to be provided. So what I would suggest a takeaway is for us to follow up with the province, see what form or format they are requiring, and then we'll be better informed on the format if it's beyond the written authorization that we ought to prescribe.
I'm glad you'll take that up. Page 6, referral of billing disputes to police. Who do you recommend that if there's a dispute on she said, he said, where would they go to now? Would we establish something of our own under MLS?
No, through you, Mr. Chair, our position is, and the position of the police is this is a civil matter. It's a contractual issue that the police nor the city ought to be in the middle of.
I would like to have a second round, Mr. Chair, and I will certainly. Sure. Thank you.
Good. And Deputy Mayor Liberamaker, and followed by Councillor Giorgio. Please go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. In terms of the report, I'm just flipping to the recommendation. I think it's number 17. If my staff report is consistent with the recommendations, which I think it is, about payment options. Why is staff not recommending credit/debit card payments?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have aligned this recommendation with that of the province that strictly stated credit card payments.
In our taxi industry, do we require people to have credit and debit card payments?
Through you, Mr. Chair, technically we do not require the taxis to be equipped with point-of-sale terminals. They are required, if they do have accept credit or debit, to provide notice on any additional fee that's charged. That is an outstanding item from the taxi. Some of the taxi industry would like them mandated, others would not. We have not mandated that equipment into taxis.
Oh, well, great.
No,
I'll have a motion for our next meeting. I thought we actually had. So, but we could mandate credit debit card payments.
So through you, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair, what we are requiring is that they accept credit card payments. We are not mandating the format in how they are to take those credit card payments. So we're not mandating a specific type of terminal or the requirement of a terminal. There's so many options now for people to process credit card payments. We've left it simply in line with the provincial regulation that says they must accept.
Right. But we could also require tow truck operators to accept debit card payments, correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we did not make an express recommendation in that regard.
No, you didn't.
No, and
but we could.
I would want to get back to you on whether or not we want to be entering into that foray or not.
But again, we allow that for taxis. Am I not correct?
Yes, we do permit it.
Must accept debit card payments as well as credit card payments.
I didn't bring my taxi bylaw with me.
Yes, they can, yeah.
I don't think mandated debit.
Yes, they do.
No, they don't have to, no. Yeah, that's what I thought. Just going back to taxi, we do not mandate the type of payment that they must take, but we have indicated where they take those types of payments, they must advise of any additional charges. So again, we are not mandating the manner in which the industry does the payment processing, but just that they must accept it. In this context, in line with the province.
Okay, thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, in terms of the tolls, I'll call it outside the city. Recommendation number 9 says they're allowed, the operators are allowed to charge a fee of $3.25 per kilometer beyond 5K outside the city. Why? Why beyond 5K and not 3K and not 10K, and why not 0K, or why not as soon as you cross the border, as a couple of the deputants suggested?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's a very fair question and a very fair argument. Given the GTA geographically, we looked at a general range around the city that if, and it's only in the event of the vehicle not being taken to our collision reporting center, that there's a modest distance that would be captured in the $250 rate. So that was the thinking behind that, was that that $250 would capture that any nominal distance beyond the city boundary. Certainly that's, fair comments made by the deputants in that respect. We'd be happy to take back if you so direct.
So through you, Mr. Chair, so your rationale for 5K is that, like you said, there's a standard fee that has some variability.
Yeah.
You've picked 5K not because it's a magic number, just because staff thought that was a reasonable number.
Yeah, in the general range beyond the boundary of the city, yes. But we're happy to revisit if so directed.
Okay, and then finally, Mr. Chair, I think the CAA submission talked about having a standard, just a second. A standard receipt, I think, as opposed to companies all making their own and maybe have different information and some not having any information. Right. Do you think there's merit in us creating a standard receipt or standard receipt or certain information operators have to give to that person? So for example, I'm guessing very few of them today actually give our phone number at MLS.
Mm-hmm. Through you, Mr. Chair, our recommendation number 15 outlines all of the specific details that we are indicating are required to be provided in the written authorization or consent to tow, as it's called.
Yep.
We did not believe that the city was best placed to be in a position to be printing the receipts or invoices or consent to tow forms for the entire tow industry. They are more than capable of running their businesses in that regard. So our interest was ensuring that in Rec 15, we do outline in accordance, some of it in accordance with the provincial guidance, specific items that they must provide. That does include at letter X, number 10, an itemized bill listing services provided and the cost for each service and the total cost charged, so would constitute a receipt. So we feel Rec 15 gets to that interest.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Giorgio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make sure I understand the recommendations here. Is it mandatory that vehicles be towed to a collision center first? Or can someone like myself who may have had an accident in the past and I know a particular body shop and I get it towed directly to the body shop, is that now I have to go to the collision center first and then get it retowed to the body shop? Is that correct, or can I go direct?
No, so through you, Mr. Chair, it depends on the nature of the accident, Councillor DiGiorgio. If the property damage is under $2,000, that's considered a non-reportable accident. You're not required to go immediately to the collision reporting center. If it is a reportable accident greater than $2,000,
if the police attend the site.
Pardon?
If the police attend the accident
certainly.
site, then it's a reportable accident.
If the police end up attending and investigating on scene, you're not required to go to the CRC. If it's a non-reportable accident, you're not required to go to the CRC. It's $2,000 and above, or if the police are not there, then yes, you are required to go to the CRC, and that's the HTA and the way the Toronto Police Services has implemented accident reporting policies for the city. So that's not under our auspices. We're not telling you that. That's other law and the police service on how they implement the requirement to report
Tracy, I'm still a little bit confused.
Okay.
If the police attend the site,
yep,
even though the damage, let's say, is $4,000 or $5,000, that is deemed to be a non-reportable accident. It can go direct.
No, so
it is a reportable accident.
Yeah. So if you have an accident, the police do not attend. The damage is less than $2,000.
You can go direct. Okay.
That's called a non-reportable accident. The police may attend, they may not attend. They may happen upon you. That does not go to the CRC. If an accident is reportable, which is greater than $2,000 generally, you are required to go to the collision reporting center. However, if the police attend on the road and investigate your accident, that accident report has been taken, then you can go wherever you like. You're no longer required to go to the CRC. And it's those circumstances, and the police may attend for a variety of reasons. If the collision reporting center is closed after midnight, if there's belief of potentially criminal offenses such as an impaired driver, property damage outside of your vehicle or other vehicles. So there's certain criteria that the Toronto Police Service has, whether they will attend an accident scene. So if they attend and take your accident report, investigate it, you can have the vehicle taken wherever you so choose, and you're subject to the 250.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. There was a request from the Vice Chair to go for a second round, and the Deputy Mayor as well, Deborah Maker. Is the will of the committee. I'm okay with that, to allow them. You would try to be concise and unambiguous with the questions so we can get it on. We have a lot of deputants for the next item. Are we okay with that? Okay. Okay. Vice Chair, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to staff, I'm going to continue where I took off. So there's a disagreement. My car is cooked up, and although I was red and whatever else, and on the way there, the tow truck driver says, it's going to cost you a little bit more. And how would I be able to then complain about that tow truck driver? And whom do I complain? Right now, was the police. Where do I go if this is not anymore the case?
So through you, Mr. Chair, if it's a matter of being overcharged from an accident tow different than our rate as we prescribe in our bylaw, we will take those complaints. And that is one of the more popular complaints we do deal with, is overcharging on our regulated rates. The provision that you've referenced is in respect to any other type of tow where there is a dispute over the rates. Currently, the bylaw has the police as the adjudicator of that issue, and they are not to be. It is a contractual issue that ought to be dealt with outside of the police intervening. And that's Rec 27.
We are the ones licensing the tow truck operators, like we do taxi cabs, like we do everything else. In a taxi cab situation, if there's a disagreement, there is a means that the public can then launch a complaint, and you call the taxi cab operator to the carpet. Why not the same here?
Through you, Mr. Chair, so that is still the case, Councillor Karygiannis. If there is yes, they are a regulated industry. If there's a complaint about conduct related to items in our bylaw that we regulate, then absolutely the complaint can come to us. And I suspect that there will be calls that people make that actually does not fall into our purview, and then we can direct them accordingly. But simply, this provision, Rec 27, is eliminating a dated provision that the police are the arbiters of a contractual dispute, which is not their role. It is a civil matter. But if there's complaints about conduct around regulated conduct or regulated rates, which is the accident tow rate primarily, the complaints can be made to us, and they will be investigated and dealt with.
Let me give you an example. An accident happens in the city of Toronto. A tow truck operator goes in, fast talks to the person involved, and hooks up the car and tows it up in Markham somewhere. And they keep the car there for a couple of days, and the person wanting to get his vehicle out, he can't. And the tow truck operator says, well, you got to pay this, 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 and everything else. Where does that person then go?
If it's a City of Toronto licensed tower, then I would suggest the call comes through to us, and we'll triage it and direct them accordingly.
If somebody that is not a City of Toronto tow truck operator comes, I mean, like where my constituency is, I'm right below Markham, but, as an example, there's an accident at a pharmacy in McNichol, and they just, they hear it on the radio and they swoop down. Then what?
So through you, Mr. Chair, they would be providing service unlicensed. In order for them to provide towing service in the City of Toronto, they are required to be licensed by us. So if they come in without any provision to the contrary, if they come into our city without a Toronto license, then they can be charged for operating without a license.
Right, going back to my original question, that an accident happens and it's towed up in Markham, and it's a tow truck operator which is not licensed in the City of Toronto. What provisions are there, and what would you be doing to that individual that comes down into my area, picks up a car, and then takes it up to Markham in a storage situation?
Okay, there was a lot to that scenario.
Okay, accident
through-
happens.
Yeah.
The person from Markham comes down, the operator hooks up the car and takes it out.
Yep.
And then I have absolutely no recourse of getting my car out of the pound or anything. What do I do? I mean, the accident happened in the city of Toronto. This person that came down was not from the city of Toronto. What would your actions be?
Okay, so through you, Mr. Chair, generally piecing that together, we get the complaint. Now, if it's a tow truck operating in the City of Toronto without a City of Toronto license, they can be charged by us for operating unlicensed. If they've taken it into a storage yard, into another jurisdiction that regulates them, we would clearly be doing the referral and discussion with that other jurisdiction. There's also the avenue through the Ministry of Government and Consumer Services to initiate complaints about overall conduct if it's outside of our regulatory reach.
I appreciate it. Somebody comes that's not licensed to and hooks up my car in the city of Toronto. Would you then step in, or would you refer this?
So for them operating a tow truck in the City of Toronto without a license, we would step in. We would deal with them doing an unlicensed tow. Anything beyond that, and there's a variety of scenarios and a variety of different factors, we would investigate and determine the next appropriate course of action in that circumstance.
Thank you. So that's it for questions now. Speakers? Well, the deputy mayor is not here.
Do you have any other questions? Okay.
Okay. Okay. Speakers? Any speakers on the item? You're working, okay. Any speakers? Councilor Giorgio?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have a motion ready, but I had made a note of a couple of points that I think require greater consideration by staff, and some of it I think would be referred back to staff. This is a very difficult industry to try and regulate. I mean, I don't think it's any secret that this has been a problematic industry for both the police and residents and the industry itself. The three comments that I think that, or the 3 points that I think should receive greater consideration, and I would refer them back to staff, is the towing fee for private property. I think that needs to be tweaked a little bit. I also think the recovery rate may also be looked at with a view to modifying it and increasing it somewhat, and perhaps introducing some kind of compensation for tow truck drivers when they attend the collision reporting centers and they have to wait around for a lengthy period of time. I think we may look at some kind of a compensation for them on occasions like that. By and large, I think everything else that's being recommended is reasonable. One can never know, what percentage increase on the toll rate would be realistic. I know one gentleman said, you know what, we've really got to look at the methodology of arriving at what constitutes a reasonable increase in toll rates. And, what that methodology might be, I honestly don't know what fair value is and all that kind of stuff. It's also a function of the nature of the business in terms of how much people in the industry, the tow truck drivers, actually do in a given period of time, in a day. I mean, if they're picking up 10 tows, that's one thing. If they're picking up 2 tows a day, that's another thing. I mean, we also have to look at, we don't want to generate greater and greater accidents, obviously, but we have to look at the compensation system that exists that makes it a viable opportunity for people to work in that industry. So those are the 3 things that I think I would, and I'm sorry I didn't write them out, that I would recommend we refer back to staff. Do I need to repeat them? Or write them down, yeah. The private property tolls. So I want to refer it back so that the city city staff look at.
Is it in here?
Councilor Giorgio, we'll get back to you on that one.
Let me write something down.
Are you finished?
Yeah, I'm finished, thank you.
You done? Okay, great. Deputy Mayor, are you ready with your recommendations?
My apologies, Mr. Chair, for not getting my motions in a little quicker. I sort of waited till the end of our discussion. Right, Mr. Chair, I'm ready to go.
Fantastic.
Thanks,
So
Mr.
please go
Chair.
ahead.
I have actually 4 motions that I think the clerks can put up just as I'm going through. I think the first one is just going to amend recommendation 17 to replace the words credit card payments with the words credit debit card payments. I think nowadays if somebody wants to pay by credit card or by debit card, they should be able to. I'm going to move that recommendation number 9 be amended to remove the words beyond 5 kilometers so that it reads that the owners operators can charge a fee of $3.25 per kilometer for each kilometer outside of the city limits. A motion to that we require tow truck operators to wear personal protective equipment, the safety vests. I just assumed that they all did, but I guess it'd be good to make sure it's in our bylaw. And finally, I'm moving a motion that asks staff to review the deputations and submissions that were received today and report to council if necessary on any recommended changes. If our staff review all the submissions and deputations that we received today and said they're great submissions, but there's no need to change any of our recommendations, then they wouldn't need a staff report. But if they actually say, you know, that third deputant talking about you know, one of the centers, we've heard that, we actually think there should be a change in the recommendations, then I think this just authorizes staff to do that. Mr. Chair, it has been a long time since we've done some serious consideration of the tow truck bylaws. I think from the tenure of what I've heard today is that people more or less are happy. No one's ever perfectly happy, but I think most people are here today saying, you know what, there are some minor changes that we might want to do to your report, but the report along with the provincial legislation really does give, I think, consumers a level of protection that they haven't had, I'll say maybe a decade or 15 years ago when I first got on council. Certainly, I happen to be a member of CAA. I feel a great level of comfort knowing that there's an organization there that I will call and that will not rip me off, because they're a business that's created to protect consumers, not take advantage of me or a member of my family when we are in a very traumatic accident. And that goes from a fender bender where you may have just, well, hopefully not been distracted, but you may have gone through a patch of ice, you've rear-ended somebody. That itself in a minor fender bender accident is very upsetting for a lot of people. You don't have your wits about you. When somebody, you know, when you get 3 tow trucks show up at the same time, each one rushing up to you to say, here, come with me. It is very confusing for people. They don't know what their rights are. They're not used to being in that situation, where for the tow truck driver, they've been in this situation 500 times before. So there has not in the past been a level playing field. I think that playing field has been brought into a proper account now. So I'm happy to move forward with some of these minor amendments to the staff report. And again, the one recommendation is just asking staff to consider the deputations and submissions we've all received today, and that if they believe there should be some changes to staff recommendations, they have our authorization to submit a report directly to council. If they think there's no changes needed, then they don't bring any changes forward. So, Mr. Chair, with that, I'll just move those amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. The next speaker is questions. And
I've got, sorry, I just need to ask a question of the Deputy Mayor on this issue. Would you not agree that trucks, some of the trucks have different, they're made up differently, they have different winches, they're configured differently. Would you not also consider that besides the operators wearing safety equipment that will, you know, reflective equipment, that somehow these trucks also have to be come into line in order to have this reflective equipment. You know, some trucks just have a winch at the back and everything else. There's no reflective equipment. There's nothing, you know, except the lights. Now, you're stopped somewhere, you certainly would turn the lights on, but I've seen trucks that have caused accidents. Would you not agree that we also ask staff to come up with a set of recommendations that pretty well, I wouldn't say all trucks are the same, but there's some markings on the trucks that, besides the lights, that are reflective and people can see them?
Yes, I think that I would certainly support that, and I think that's a very wise step forward. I just didn't think of that.
Okay, would you be, I'm not sure if I'm out of order, would I be able to make a friendly amendment?
My sense is staff would probably, that's a little more complicated than asking the operators to make sure they're wearing safety reflective vests, because that's pretty easy.
No, but what you were saying there, Councillor, is that the city require tow truck operators to wear personal. I mean, can we not say that city require tow truck operators that, and that tow trucks have reflective equipment or reflective besides the lights that show that they're there?
I certainly think that's a friendly amendment, and perhaps we can work with staff to get a wording that they're comfortable with, but yes.
Sure. I mean, can I ask staff if they're okay with that?
We can just
take that off.
Yeah, I think that's a friendly amendment.
Are you okay with that?
So, to you, Mr. Chair, we'd have to look at whether there's any provisions in the Highway Traffic Act or CVOR or anything else governing vehicles on the road in respect to appropriate markings. So I don't want to say, yes, that's fine, in case we run into conflict with something else governing this. I don't know off the top of my head.
So, then can the wording be that provided that this is allowed to, with other government bodies, that this be something that we look at?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the only other component I would add to this is not an element that was included in any of our consultations with the industry. So, you know, as we're potentially asking people to amend the way they operate their vehicles and their business, I think it would be prudent on us to do that. I will also say, just since I have the mic for a second, there was a great deal of work done, and it was referenced by the gentleman from the CAA about safety for towing operators on the roadways, and I have got to believe that given it's their own personal life safety, that they have equipped their vehicles to be appropriate. If they haven't, then that's unfortunate, and whether we should be stepping in on that or not is another case. But on this, if we're going to talk about modifications to their vehicles, it is an element that was not discussed in any consultations, and I would not want to say yes, though it may be a great idea, it's something that we want to regulate without having had those discussions with the industry. So if you can modify that, we're happy to have the conversations. We are enjoying, I think, a pretty good relationship with the industry. Ms. Lorraine Chua is well informed on the industry issues now. We're happy to take that away, but I don't think it's something we should be compelling without consultation.
A question on that. In terms of, a question on your comments. In terms of the consultation, in terms of the public having the right to speak and to be heard, this is something that it hasn't been discussed at all in the past.
That is correct, sir. We have not had conversation with the industry about the vehicle itself as far as markings or equipment beyond the personal equipment like the vest.
One of the recommendations of the Deputy Mayor is to report directly to City Council on a supplementary report if necessary. Would you be able to do a little bit of additional research on this and to report to Council if necessary on that aspect as well?
Through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely. We'd be happy to report back on a supplemental in that regard.
Thank you. Councillor Burnside, did you have a question?
Thank you. Through you to Councillor DeBaremaker regarding the additional charge of $3.25 per kilometre. So I'm kind of confused. Is this after they go to the reporting center, or is this just a direct tow?
If my understanding is correct from the staff recommendations, this would be a direct tow. And in questioning of staff, I think when I asked, is there a magic number of why 5 kilometers, not 3 kilometers or 6 kilometers, they've sort of said, well, it was just a line that we drew, and I think it's reasonable to say, no, you go north of Steeles, you get the charge for your kilometers.
But Steeles is somewhat, would you agree Steeles is somewhat of an imaginary line?
Yes.
Would it make sense, or I guess, my question is, would it make sense to make it just beyond a certain distance you get a, like if you're, I guess my point is if you're coming from the lake shore and you end up half a block south of Steeles, that's a heck of a distance than if you're 2 blocks south of Steeles and you're going 3 blocks north.
Yes, I agree with you. I think that there's always a debate amongst staff, and I guess amongst ourselves, do you charge a flat rate or a per kilometer rate, similar to TTC? If you come in from Steeles Avenue, you pay the same fare as somebody who lives at Yonge and Bloor. But I think staff have recommended that once you're out of our city's boundaries, you as an operator are allowed to charge a per kilometer rate. And they just said, well, 5 kilometers seemed reasonable. There's no magic number to it, so I'm just saying, no, if you go across that municipal boundary, then the charge kicks in. So it'll advantage some people more than others, but I guess there's no perfect answer. But I think if you get picked up at Lakeshore and you say my mechanic's up on Highway 7, that once you go north of Steeles Avenue, so you've gone from Lakeshore up to Steeles.
You're paying an extra 15 bucks.
Yeah.
It just seems somewhat random to me, but okay, and it's not you, it's just, I'm getting.
I'm amending the staff recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions with regards to the clarification of the motions? If not, we'll go to speakers. The Vice Chair.
Thank you. I asked staff to prepare a motion. If you'd like to go to somebody else until they're ready with it.
Any other speakers? Well, in the interest of time is, before we get, of course, to the next item, which is the item number 2, and that deals with city recommendations for cannabis legislation, we have a long list of deputants, and the committee will be recessing at 12:30 and will be reconvening at 1:30. So probably we may be able to listen to 2 or 3 deputants between now and 12:30. And so you may want to come back at 1:30. You don't have to stay here, because probably we're not going to get to them. It's going to take us at least another 5 or 10 minutes on this item. So we have the option, and I would like to consult with them. Your recommendation is ready? Okay.
I can put it up.
Sure, please.
So before we adjourn, I will speak to the audience with regards to the next item. Now, the Vice Chair is ready.
Thank you. If my motion, the staff can put it on, I'll greatly appreciate it. One of the things that I would ask is that we have the Executive Director report back to this committee if there's any requirements to have tow truck operators to have protective measures on their vehicles, reflective protective measures on their vehicles.
Any time period?
Second quarter of 2018. Would that be okay with everybody?
That's fine. Madam Executive Director of MLS,
2018.
Ms. Cook.
You want to report back on
Yes.
the vehicles at a later point?
2018, second quarter.
The first quarter of 18.
First quarter or second quarter?
We can do it in time for the summer.
Let's give some time to staff. Let's say second quarter.
Okay.
Okay.
If we can do it in time for the summer, but if not, that would be great.
The So if this can be done on the supplementary, that would be fine. Otherwise, we'll go to the first quarter of 2018 with that.
So are you making a friendly amendment? Okay, fine. Second quarter or first quarter?
First quarter.
First quarter, okay.
2018? Okay. So should I put it in?
Yeah, if needed. Are you done?
I'm done, yes.
Okay. So in the interest of time,
I just, you're going to speak, right, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman? I just want to, just for a minute, this item, we've been, actually it goes back to November 2011, if you look at the history on it. So this has been back and forth to licensing for a few years now, and the staff, I just want to thank the staff for the work that you've done on this report, and as well as the number of consultation meetings that were held. I know that everyone, all the industry and other parties were engaged in the consultation. So I do support the recommendations that the staff have put forward and some of the amendments.
thank you, Councilor Nuciara, and I'll be extremely brief, and given the timing that's taking. First and foremost, I want to thank all the deputants for your excellent presentations, and to city staff, you have wrote an excellent report with good recommendations as well. So in the interest of time, once again, I think that the recommendation of the Deputy Mayor Di Veramiche, I think that's will allow somehow some of the recommendations perhaps from the stakeholders to be expanded a bit more. For example, with the CAA, with Mr. Chang, he spoke, and the Deputy Mayor also spoke on that. In terms of the potential privacy impact of photographs or pictures and so on, and how that should be perhaps stored in a central location within the city, or disposed of at whatever point if there is no time for it. So that's one of the concerns that I would like probably to be taken care of as well in the supplementary. And once again, thank you to all the stakeholders, all the deputants for their presentations. And now we have some recommendations to deal with. We have 4 recommendations altogether, 2 from the Deputy Mayor, 1 from Councilor Di Giorgio, and the other recommendation from the Vice Chair. Yeah, if you don't mind just to, yeah, so we'll vote it on it. So this will be for the supplementary report directly to City Council. All those in favor? Against? Unanimous. The next one. One B. All those in favor? Against? It carries. One C. All those in favor? Against? It carries. There is one referral as well. And 1D. All those in favor? Against? It carries. This is from Councilor Di Giorgio. All those in favor? Against? It carries. And there is one from the Vice Chair. And on this one, there was a timing, first quarter 2018. With that friendly amendment, all those in favor? Against? It carries. Now, on the recommendations from staff as amended, all those in favor? Against? Carry. Fantastic. We are done with the first item. And now we have 10 more minutes. So we'll get to the members of the public. I did ask city staff to make a presentation on the cannabis legislation, which would be very beneficial to the members of the committee as well as to the public. And probably that's going to take more than 5 minutes, perhaps. Okay, so on this, one thing that I'm going to ask members of the public, can I have your attention, please? To the members of the public, if anyone has not registered with the clerk and they would like to speak, so probably between now and 12:30, if you don't mind just to approach the clerk and add those names onto it.
Chair, point of order, if I may.
Please.
Just want to add that when deputies are making speeches, they should speak to the item and not in generalities about, I mean.
I will speak to that as the chair. Thank you. Is city staff, are we ready for the presentation?
Mr. Chair, I'm going to ask that we just recess now and reconvene at 1:30. We're not going to get through the...
Is that the will of the committee? Yes. If so, okay. So we'll reconvene at 1:30. Thank you.